Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Chad Amelia. Chad Amelia was born in 1992 in Santa Clara, California, USA. His parents, of Irish descent, married young and then moved to the United States. They were eager to pursue the American dream, a common goal for millions. When they arrived in the United States, they found themselves isolated in a foreign country, with no one nearby to support them. Communication with relatives was only possible by phone. Despite the distance, the couple and their children remained determined and did not return to Ireland. Chad grew up with his younger brother Shane. They got along and supported each other from a young age. Following the example of their parents, difficulties shaped their characters, making them kind and fair. Both boys were always ready to help others in need. Chad, the eldest, was especially hardworking. He played baseball and football in high school, and when a coach noticed his talent, he was given a spot on the school team. This opportunity fueled his passion for sports, and he became a talented football player. After graduating from high school, he attended California State University, Chicago, graduating in 2018. Soon after, he joined Camarilla, an accounting firm. At the same time, he continued his studies in economics to improve his accounting skills. Known for being sociable and kind, Chad easily connects with people. One spring day in 2018, 20-year-old Chad was walking his dog in the park when he unexpectedly met Bryn Spetcher, a smart, friendly, and determined 27-year-old girl. Like Chad, Bryn is from Chicago, Illinois. She moved to Washington when she was older, making some changes to pursue her education and find a good job. Bryn was born with hearing problems and was nearly deaf from a young age, forcing her to wear a hearing aid. This made her feel out of place in the educational environment, leading to various challenges. However, it also fueled her desire to help others, as she tried to maintain a positive attitude. Despite the difficulties of moving to California, Bryn earned a degree in audiology, a significant accomplishment that she had long pursued. Her career was just beginning, and she quickly secured a position as an audiologist at a hospital in Los Angeles. She wanted to help others who, like her, faced hearing challenges. Bryn lived in California for about a year but was not sociable and often took time off from work, so she did not have a wide circle of acquaintances, communicating only with a few friends with whom she could spend weekends. Chad changed her life dramatically. They started talking and quickly realized that they had many common interests. Chad was very fond of his smart and attractive girlfriend. He often talked about her to his friends, and he expressed his happiness. She seemed pleased too, eager to share stories about him with her friends. They seemed like the perfect couple, visiting each other often. On May 27, 2018, Bryn went to her boyfriend's house, bringing along her beloved service dog, a husky guide dog. Her boyfriend, Chad, also had a dog, and the two animals got along well. The following weekend, about a month later, Bryn was planning a business trip to another city, so she wanted to spend some time relaxing with her Chad before the trip. And Chad lived in the Tarzana Oaks area of California. That evening, one of Chad's neighbors, a guy named Vinny, returned home around 2 a.m. He spent about half an hour with Chad and Bryn, who were watching their favorite TV series. Vinny then went to sleep in his room, while another neighbor slept, using earplugs and sleeping pills. That night, Bryn and Chad decided to smoke marijuana. In California, marijuana use is legal, having been legalized in 1996. Chad took a few breaths and quickly relaxed. Bryn at first, she didn't feel anything, so she tried again. This time, she felt terrible. Her mind went blank, her vision blurred, and she had trouble breathing. She told her boyfriend, who went into the kitchen to get her some water. She felt so bad that she feared for her life and asked Chad to stay with her. Chad, who had used before, didn't have the same problems and was calm enough to support her. Bryn admits that she thought she was going to die. She began hallucinating about dying in pain and felt like she wouldn't survive the night. She was angry at her boyfriend because he seemed fine and suspected that he was setting her up. In her hallucinations, he became the bad guy who orchestrated her death through drug use. She also heard voices in her head urging her to kill him, and Bryn realized that the only way she could survive was to get rid of her boyfriend. Suddenly, she stood up and went into the kitchen, where she picked up a large knife. Bryn returned to the living room, where Chad was still lying on the couch. She stabbed him multiple times in the chest. At that moment, she heard voices urging her to continue stabbing. She couldn't resist them because she felt out of control. Bryn experienced a fierce cruelty and aggression she had never felt before. The hallucinations continued, and with each stab, she felt relief. Meanwhile, the neighbors were in other rooms on the second floor. One was fast asleep and didn't hear anything. The second neighbor, Vinny, heard some rustling from downstairs, but there was no loud noise or screaming, so he didn't think much of it. Vinny assumed the couple was watching TV. After a while, he heard Chad's voice asking Bryn to leave him alone and call for help. The voice got louder and more frightening, which scared Vinny. To find out what was going on, he started going down from the first floor. When he walked in, the first thing he noticed was the frightened dogs. When he entered the room, he saw the furniture scattered everywhere. In the living room, Bryn had a knife in her hand, covered in blood. Chad lay there, wheezing, his eyes wide with horror as he looked at Vinny. Chad's hand was slashed by her, defenseless, but Bryn, in her frenzy, stabbed him with a kitchen knife. A large gash across his chest that Bryn continued to attack with a look of fury on her face. Vinny yelled at her to stop, but instead, Bryn turned to look at him with a blank expression. She was still holding the knife. Feeling the danger, Vinny quickly went upstairs and knocked on the second neighbor's door to warn him. However, the neighbor was fast asleep and did not respond. So Vinny grabbed his cell phone and ran downstairs. Fearing for his life, he ran out onto the street and quickly called 911. Once outside, Vinny used his phone to call emergency services. His screams attracted the attention of the neighbors, who ran out to see what was going on, making Vinny feel safer. He started banging on the windows and shouting for the girl to stop. The neighbors, seeing the situation inside the house, also started shouting. Everyone was scared and shocked. Meanwhile, inside the apartment, Bryn continued to attack Chad, not paying attention to the commotion outside. Within minutes, the police met Vinny, who was sobbing about the events that were happening. He could only point to the apartment where the violent attack was taking place. The police rushed into the house to intervene. In the living room, they found Bryn repeatedly stabbing a young man in the chest. The room was covered in blood, and although the young man showed no signs of life, Bryn did not stop. The police considered using force to end the attack. However, when ordered to drop the knife, Bryn began stabbing herself in the neck. The police quickly used a stun gun, but it was ineffective. Bryn continued to harm herself, so the police used a baton to disarm her. It took 9 blows to knock the knife out of her hand, even breaking her arm in several places, but she seemed completely unaware of the injuries. Only then did Bryn drop the knife. In addition to stabbing Chad, she also stabbed her dog several times. When other rescue services arrived, everyone was shocked by the horrific scene, which looked like a bloodbath. Doctors tried to resuscitate Vinny, but he was in shock and could not remember or explain what had happened in the house. The experience had a profound effect on him, and he needed a long recovery period with the help of psychologists. The dog was treated at a veterinary clinic and eventually recovered from his injuries. Unfortunately, by the time the police arrived, Chad was dead. There was a lot of blood from the stab wound and witnesses to the incident were present. These witnesses were neighbors who had come out of the house when they heard screams. They described what they saw to the police, but could not understand how such a brutal attack could have happened or what had provoked it. Chad had 108 stab wounds, most of them concentrated around the heart and neck. Some of the wounds were superficial and not life-threatening, while others penetrated vital organs. It is difficult to determine which specific wound caused Chad's death. He also had multiple self-defense wounds. Bryn after self-inflicted wounds to her neck. She was rushed to the hospital, where she was placed on a ventilator and intubated. When police tried to communicate with her, they used only a piece of paper and a pen, as she was unable to fully respond because of the life support equipment. Once she was stabilized in the hospital, she was able to communicate fully. Various tests showed traces of mild substances in her blood. Doctors noted that the levels were very low and did not pose a threat to her life or mental health. It is unusual for such a small amount to cause such an extreme reaction. However, doctors did not rule out the possibility that her blood levels had dropped. When Bryn spoke to the police, she claimed that she did not remember anything that had happened. As a result, she did not know where Chad was or what had happened to him. She believed that her injuries may have been caused by an assault with the intent to rape her. In addition to the neck injury, she also suffered a broken neck and a bludgeoned arm, which was how the police safely disarmed her of the knife. However, she did not remember the event either. Bryn could not believe the police account of how she attacked and stabbed her boyfriend. Despite this, she did not seem to feel remorse for her actions toward Chad. Bryn refused to comment further and immediately requested a lawyer, as she considered herself innocent and blamed the incident on the effects of drugs. The last thing she remembered was being discharged from the hospital after 4 days, on May 31st, when she was immediately arrested for Chad's murder. Eventually, she was able to share a more detailed account of the events of that tragic night. Bryn recounted her story. She had gone to visit her boyfriend with a dog and they watched TV together. Around 10:30 p.m., when Chad stepped outside to smoke, she joined him, saying she wanted to try it too. She then began to feel unwell, hallucinating and hearing voices in her head. Bryn had difficulty breathing, felt disoriented and nauseous. She then had a hallucination blaming Chad for her condition. The hallucination urged her to kill Chad, claiming it was the only way to stop her bad feelings. Although she initially resisted, the hallucinations grew stronger. Feeling like she was going to die, Bryn attacked Chad with a knife but insisted that she had no control at the time, claiming she was innocent. When the police arrived, the hallucinations told her to harm herself. She complied with these voices. Bryn insisted that she could not resist because the voices in her head had complete control over her. She could not even drop the knife when the police asked her to, until they broke her arm. Bryn believed that she was suffering from drug-induced psychosis at the time. She was eventually charged with first-degree murder, but she pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Preliminary hearings took place and her bail was set at $500,000, which she paid, allowing her to await trial at home. During this time, the police continued to investigate and Bryn's attorney repeatedly requested adjournments. And Chad's murder trial was set for October 23, 2023, but a new district attorney took office a month earlier, causing further delays. The trial finally began on November 9, 2023. The new prosecutor reduced her charges to manslaughter, which shocked the victim's family. They could not understand how someone could accidentally stab the victim more than 100 times. Remarkably, all of this took so long that Chad's mother did not live to see the trial and never saw justice. She passed away in 2020. The court psychiatrist concluded that Bryn suffered from a psychotic disorder caused by smoking. This decision was supported by other experts, and according to the prosecution, they did not have enough evidence to refute this conclusion. During the trial, Chad's family insisted that it was a deliberate massacre and demanded punishment. The defense argued that Bryn's behavior showed signs of psychosis. She was not aware of her actions, first stabbing her boyfriend and then hitting him multiple times. A police officer using a stun gun was unable to stop her, and they were only able to take the knife away after breaking her arm with 9 blows from her baton. This behavior showed that she was psychotic. However, according to Bryn, she understood what was happening. She remembered everything and claimed that she saw the murder as the only way to survive. She was aware of her actions and made her own decisions, despite experiencing hallucinations. Her arguments were strongly opposed by her attorneys. As a result, the defense continued to delay the trial, which lasted for 5 years. The main issues in dispute were whether there was intent to kill Chad and whether Bryn used the drug voluntarily. Under California law, a person can be held responsible for such crimes while under the influence of drugs or alcohol if it can be proven that the use was voluntary. If the drug was coerced, the killing is considered unintentional. This must be proven. The prosecution pointed to numerous letters from the girl, in which Bryn repeatedly told friends that she had been drinking. She also mentioned smoking occasionally, suggesting that this was not her first time using. The prosecution argued that on the day Chad was killed, she also used the drug voluntarily, as she had done before. Many colleagues defended Bryn, describing her as a very responsible person. She had no criminal record and no one could testify that she was capable of causing such a psychotic episode. However, this claim seems dubious, given her medical history, which should have made her aware of the potential consequences. She defended herself by saying that she was unsure what drugs her boyfriend had smoked and given her that night and believed he had given them to her intentionally. No other drugs were found in his home. Bryn's parents defended her, claiming that she had no romantic relationship with Chad and that she was acting in self-defense against harassment. They attempted to portray her as a heroine. However, friends on both sides disagreed, saying that Chad and Bryn had been together for nearly 2 months, had an intimate relationship, and that everyone knew about it. Chad's relatives denied any allegations of violence against him. They described him as respectful of women and noted that although he had a smoking habit, which his parents had advised him to quit, it was legal and had never caused any problems. They insisted he was not aggressive, so they did not believe he would attack his girlfriend. Throughout the trial, Bryn showed no remorse for what had happened. The only time she cried was when the brutal details of her arrest were described. She could recall the intense pain of being beaten with a baton. The case was complex, controversial, and attracted considerable public attention. Many were puzzled as to how a seemingly kind-hearted girl, dedicated to helping others, could commit a brutal murder. The jury then deliberated on the verdict. The jury then found Bryn Spejcher, 32, guilty of manslaughter. Bryn showed emotion for the second time during the trial. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. At that point, she was focused only on her sentence. She did not care that she had caused serious harm to her loved one. Bryn simply did not want to take responsibility for her actions. Chad's father spoke to reporters, expressing his frustration with the justice system's decision, which he considered unfair. He also pointed to inconsistencies in Bryn's testimony. She contradicted herself. For example, she initially described her boyfriend as a nice young man who was easy to talk to. However, when the subject of smoking was brought up, Bryn admitted that she had always been afraid of him and then began to deny that they had a relationship. Chad's father said that Bryn did not want to take responsibility for her terrible actions and tried to blame Chad for the bloody massacre to reduce her sentence. The father could not believe that the court would seriously consider that a person could accidentally inflict more than 100 wounds on another person. His son's death was not simple or painless. Chad had suffered a lot, and now the killer was trying to blame him with lies. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Bryn smoked of her own free will, and Chad had never forced her to take drugs when she did not like them. However, psychiatric experts confirmed that Bryn's psychosis was caused by the drug. This was one of the first cases where a voluntary user was justified in using drugs. And while awaiting the verdict, the girl was released on bail. On January 24, 2024, Bryn Spetscher was sentenced to 2 years of probation in order to complete 100 hours of community service. The judge justified the lenient sentence by stating that Bryn was not in control of his actions during a psychotic episode, making a reduced sentence appropriate. The attorney applauded the court's decision, calling it the right thing to do. However, Chad's father was unhappy with the ruling, arguing that the judge had set a dangerous precedent. He said the decision implied that marijuana users in California were being given a license to kill. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Milleke van Doorn. Milleke grew up in a typical family with her parents and 2 sisters in Zaanstad, a city in North Holland, Netherlands. Milleke was a well-behaved child who stayed out of trouble and was friendly to everyone. Having just graduated from high school with a good reputation, she was looking forward to a bright future. However, her life took a dramatic turn one summer evening. That summer night changed everything for Milleke, and her story became a national sensation. On the evening of Sunday, June 7, 1992, Milleke attended a birthday party for a friend, which was held in an apartment in a local building. The building looked almost the same back then as it does today, except for the taller trees that surround it. Milleke left her birthday celebration early to catch the last bus home, but when she arrived at the bus stop, she realized she had missed it by 30 minutes. Unbeknownst to her, the bus schedule had been adjusted due to the Pentecost holiday. She had another option to get home than taking the train from the station located half a mile away on the same street. However, she never come home. The next morning, the pastor of St. Joseph's Church, which is near the train station, made a disturbing discovery while on his morning walk. He found a body floating in a pond adjacent to the church and immediately called the police at 8:54 a.m. Within minutes, detectives arrived at the scene, and the tragic news was soon delivered to the Van Doorn family, leaving them in a state of shock and grief. Milleke's body was pulled from the water, bearing signs of a violent crime. Injuries on her neck, face, and body, including multiple stab wounds, were evident. She was also found partially undressed. In an attempt to conceal the crime, the perpetrator had covered the body with reeds, but this effort failed, leading to its discovery. The news of Milleke's tragic death was devastating for her family, who had envisioned a bright future for her. The autopsy provided some information about the crime. The presence of semen and pubic hair in Milleke's body suggested a sexual assault. The fact that there was no water in Milleke's lungs indicated that she did not drown in the pond. Instead, she had likely been killed elsewhere, and her body was later hidden in the water in an attempt to disguise the crime. The exact time of Milleke's death remained unclear, with possibilities ranging from immediately after she left a party to several hours later. Milleke's body was found in the water, which made it impossible to determine the time of death by body temperature alone. The pond was where her body was dumped, but it was not the location where she was actually killed. The police were searching for the original crime scene, where they expected to find evidence due to the severity of Milleke's injuries. A key piece of evidence was that one of her shoes was missing, which could potentially lead investigators to both the crime scene and the perpetrator. The police distributed flyers with information about the case, including the fact that one of Milleke's shoes was missing. They asked the public to report if the shoe was found, and eventually, the second shoe was discovered. At the time of the investigation in 1992, DNA research was not advanced, and DNA samples taken from Milika's body did not provide any useful leads for the detectives. The investigation began with interviews with Milika's family to determine if she had any conflicts or enemies. However, the family reported that Milika had no conflicts with anyone and was doing well personally. She had a boyfriend around her age, and they rarely fought. After learning that Milika attended a birthday party on the night she died, investigators spoke to all the guests, including her boyfriend. However, numerous interviews did not produce any leads, and everyone reported the same story that Milika had left the party just before midnight and planned to take a bus to her neighborhood. Unfortunately, none of Milika's friends were aware that the last bus had already departed by the time she reached the bus stop. In 1992, mobile phones were not widespread, making it difficult for investigators to determine if Milika had boarded the bus or reached her destination safely. After ruling out her friends as suspects, the police began searching for witnesses who may have seen or heard something on the night of the crime. They conducted door-to-door interviews with residents in the area where Milika's body was found, gathering a significant amount of information, but few specific details. Several witnesses reported hearing a woman scream briefly at night, but it was not alarming enough to prompt them to take action. Others claimed to have seen a man of Turkish appearance riding a bicycle towards the location where Milika's body was discovered. As a result, investigators shifted their focus to the Turkish community living in the Kogerveld neighborhood. Some young men from the Turkish community had previous run-ins with the law, drawing the attention of investigators. However, despite months of inquiry, the police were unable to identify a suspect. The men they questioned denied being near the pond on the night of the crime, leading to a stalemate in the investigation. 6 months after Milika van Doorn's murder, a significant discovery was made when a roofer working on the roof of St. Joseph's Church found one of Milika's shoes. This shoe had been on the roof the entire time, but it was unclear how it got there since the only way to access the roof was by ladder. The conclusion was that the perpetrator must have deliberately thrown the shoe onto the roof while at the pond, but the reasoning behind this action remains a mystery. Unfortunately, any potential evidence that may have been left on the roof was erased by harsh weather conditions over time. Years went by, and Milika's case remained unsolved, causing immense pain for her parents. Despite the passing of time, the police revisited Milika's case, conducting multiple interviews with local residents in an attempt to uncover new information. Additionally, the case was featured on several television programs, which led to an influx of calls from the public with potential leads. However, none of these efforts resulted in a breakthrough, and the identity of the suspect remains unknown. The authorities had the perpetrator's DNA samples on file, waiting for a breakthrough in testing technology. By analyzing these samples, forensic experts inferred that the perpetrator was likely a male of Turkish origin, residing in the Kogerveld area in 1992, and aged between 16 and 30 years at the time of the crime. To narrow down the search, nearly 200 men from the area voluntarily provided cheek swabs for DNA testing, but unfortunately, this effort did not yield a match. Almost 20 years after Milika's murder, a significant breakthrough occurred in April 2012. The Netherlands amended a law making it possible to conduct DNA kinship testing. By analyzing the autopsy results, evidence, and the perpetrator's behavior, investigators created a psychological profile of the suspect. The profile suggested that the perpetrator was a resentful and frustrated individual, angry at women in general. Milika was likely an accidental victim who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The perpetrator may have had a brief conversation with Milika before attacking her violently and threatening her. After satisfying his urges, he killed her to prevent her from identifying him. For several weeks after the crime, he kept a low profile, possibly pretending to be ill to avoid social interactions and conceal the scratches he sustained during the struggle with Milika. The police profiler described the suspect as a hot-tempered, selfish, and critical individual with few friends, poor relationships with girlfriends, and an inability to handle criticism. Based on this profile, investigators estimated that the perpetrator was between 18 and 25 years old in 1992. In April 2016, investigators reopened the case of Milica Van Doorn, which had gone cold for over 20 years. A new lead emerged in June 2016, when a report was filed mentioning the names of two Turkish men who had lived in Zandvoort in 1992, around the time of Milica's death. Notably, both men had left the area shortly after the incident. The police aimed to determine if these two individuals were connected to the crime. Tracking them down proved challenging, and it took over a year to locate them in Turkey and obtain the necessary DNA samples. Finally, the DNA analysis did not yield a match with the DNA evidence found on Milica's body. In 2017, authorities used DNA typing technology to re-examine the Milica case. As a result, the police contacted 133 men of Turkish origin who lived in the area where the body was found in 1992, asking for voluntary DNA samples to compare to the crime scene DNA. The goal was to analyze the Y chromosome pattern, which is passed from father to son, to identify potential relatives of the perpetrator. The authorities assured the men that their DNA would only be used for this case and would be destroyed afterward. Most of the 133 men agreed to provide a DNA sample, only a few refused. A total of 126 men participated in the study. The police appreciated their cooperation, saying it was a testament to the community's desire for justice. After a month of analysis, the results showed that the DNA of the original perpetrator was not among the samples. However, the DNA of a man who was unknowingly related to the perpetrator was found. On Monday, December 10, 2017, the police arrested the suspect who had evaded capture for 25 years. The man, 47-year-old Hussein, had refused to submit his DNA for verification, but a clever investigation led to his downfall. Since local laws prohibit sharing suspects' personal information, his full identity and photo were not made public. A breakthrough in the case came when investigators cross-checked DNA profiles of relatives, focusing on those who, like Hussein, had refused to provide a sample. Coincidentally, Hussein's brother had willingly provided his DNA to the authorities, unaware of its potential impact on his sibling. This helped the investigators build a list of people connected to Hussein through family ties, ultimately revealing his identity as the suspect who had managed to stay hidden for nearly 2.5 decades. The police obtained a warrant to take a DNA sample from Hussein without his permission. A comparison with the DNA samples from Milica's body showed a perfect match, providing strong evidence against him. As a result, Hussein was formally charged with the crime. During his 2018 trial, Hussein claimed he was not guilty. Initially, he said he was possessed by an evil spirit and couldn't remember the attack. Later, he changed his story, saying he had a secret relationship with Milica, which is why his DNA was found on her body. He claimed he had to keep the relationship a secret because he had recently gotten married. However, the judge didn't believe Hussein's new claim for two reasons. Firstly, he only made this statement a year after his arrest, and secondly, no one could confirm that Milica and Hussein even knew each other, let alone had an intimate relationship. Milica's family testified during the trial. Milica's sister spoke directly to the suspect, saying that he had kept silent for years, hadn't cooperated with the police when they asked for a DNA test, and had continued living freely in the neighborhood. She accused him of going on to start a family and have had 4 daughters and called him a monster who had ruined Milica's life. She expressed her disgust that there were men like him who used and exploited women, treated them like trash, and then simply moved on with their lives. The other sister expressed her disappointment and frustration that Hussein had not taken responsibility for his actions or shown remorse. Instead, he had made a surprising claim of a secret relationship with the victim and complained about his own family struggles. She pointed out that Hussein's family could visit him in prison if they wished, but she could only visit her sister's grave. She hoped for justice, believing that her sister deserved it after meeting a terrible end. It was a deeply emotional day for Milica van Doorn's family. When her father was given the opportunity to speak, he was filled with anger and said that Hussein's silence for 25 years was cowardly. He found Hussein's treatment of Milica to be extremely disturbing and was shocked by the news of her death. On December 11, 2018, Hussein was found guilty of Milica's murder based on DNA evidence. The court determined that the murder was committed to cover up another crime, a sex crime. Hussein was sentenced to 20 years in prison and ordered to pay €10,000 in compensation to Milica's family. Notably, Hussein refused to be present in the courtroom during the sentencing and instead remained in a cell outside. In February 2019, Hussein appealed his 20-year prison sentence and it was reduced to 19 years and 7 months. But finally, he did not get to serve the full reduced term. Hussein was found dead on June 13, 2022. According to his lawyer, he died shortly after exercising despite receiving emergency medical treatment. The attempts to revive him were unsuccessful. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Natasha Cournoyer. Natasha Cournoyer, 37 years old, has gone missing suddenly and without any notice. She didn't visit her mother, respond to phone calls, or return home. As the day went on, it became clear that none of her friends or colleagues had seen her either. Her worried relatives reported her missing at 5 p.m., prompting a police investigation. Natasha worked as a public relations specialist for the Correctional Service of Canada. Detectives began by interviewing her co-workers. Upon arrival, they found her car still parked nearby. A nervous-looking man, Michel Trottier, was standing by her vehicle. He claimed to be in a relationship with Natasha and was trying to figure out where she might have gone. The back door of Natasha's car had scratches, but it was unclear if they were related to her disappearance. With no reason to suspect Michel Trottier of involvement, detectives continued their investigation. Co-workers reported that Natasha was at work on October 1, 2009, the day before she vanished. She seemed to be in a good mood, friendly, and untroubled, with no signs of anything amiss. On October 2, Natasha needed a day off to deal with issues related to her recently deceased father's tombstone. To make up for time, she worked longer hours on October 1 and left the office around 8 p.m. According to her friends, Natasha was a kind and open person with no known conflicts or enemies. The police launched a large-scale search for Natasha, involving aviation and canine units. Initially, they focused on the area around the parking lot but found no clues to aid the investigation. Natasha's friends and relatives distributed flyers with her photo, hoping someone might have information about her disappearance. The first few hours after a person goes missing are crucial in finding witnesses or evidence. However, in Natasha's case, valuable time was lost because the police weren't notified until the evening of October 2, 21 hours after she left work. The search for Natasha took place from October 3 to 5, but unfortunately, no leads were found. Her family offered a $10,000 reward for any information that could help locate her. Natasha's boyfriend, Michel Trottier, suspected she had been kidnapped and made a televised plea for her safe release. Meanwhile, the police were investigating their personal lives. They had been together for 4 years, but their relationship had been rocky, with multiple breakups and reconciliations. The police explored all possible scenarios surrounding Natasha's disappearance. They reviewed CCTV footage from her workplace, both inside and outside the building. The footage showed Natasha arriving at 9:04 a.m. and leaving at 8:07 p.m. She had parked her car in a poorly lit area of the parking lot, and the cameras captured her walking towards it. However, she eventually disappeared from view due to the darkness. After a few minutes, the car headlights turned on and the car started moving, but instead of heading towards the exit, it drove to the opposite side of the parking lot, which was also poorly lit. The car stopped and the headlights went out. The vehicle remained in this position for about 20 minutes before moving towards the exit. It was determined that this car was not Natasha's, as she owned a Mazda. Further investigation revealed that the car in the video was a Ford Windstar minivan, which had entered the parking lot at 6:35 p.m. and parked next to Natasha's car. Based on the video footage, the police concluded that Natasha Conoyer's disappearance was likely a kidnapping. On the fifth day of the search, October 6, 2009, the focus shifted from finding a missing person to investigating a homicide. Natasha's body was discovered in a vacant lot in the Point Au Trumbull area, approximately 20 miles from her workplace. The body was located next to a dirt road that led to the riverbank. The news of Natasha's death devastated her relatives and friends, who were further disturbed by the medical examiner's report. According to the report, Natasha's cause of death was strangulation. Additionally, she had suffered 9 facial injuries, including a broken nose, and had marks on her wrists and ankles indicating that she had been bound. Seminal fluid was also found inside her body, which would serve as a source of DNA evidence. While awaiting DNA analysis results, detectives attempted to identify the owner of a minivan captured on camera the day Natasha vanished. In 2009, there were 2 motels near Natasha's workplace. On October 16, 2009, 10 days after her body was discovered, police visited both motels to review guest registration cards. At the Lido Motel, they found a guest who had registered a Ford Windstar. The guest was 48 years old Claude LaRouche, a registered sex offender with 2 prior convictions. In 1993, Claude was sentenced to 1 year in prison and 2 years of probation for coercing a 19-year-old acquaintance into sex. In 2005, he received a 40-month prison sentence for attempting to kidnap a 7-year-old girl. She managed to escape and run to a neighbor's house. Claude's 40-month sentence for the attempted kidnapping of a child raises questions about the severity of his punishment. In November 2008, Claude was released and started working as a carpenter. He married a woman with 2 sons, and they all lived together in a house about a 10-minute drive from where Natasha Conoyer disappeared. Detectives found out Claude checked into a motel the night Natasha went missing. Forensic experts examined the motel room and discovered dark red stains on the carpet, which they sent for analysis. The same day, detectives visited Claude at his home. Since he had a prior prison record, the police already had his DNA on file. However, they needed time to compare it to the DNA found on Natasha's body. Claude claimed he didn't know Natasha but admitted to frequently visiting the Lido Motel because it was cheap. He told the detectives he was unhappy with his intimate life with his wife and often rented a motel room to meet women offering paid sex services. When asked about his whereabouts on October 1st, the day Natasha disappeared, Claude said he couldn't remember anything, including staying at the Lido Motel. He attributed his memory loss to excessive substance use, but his memory partially returned soon after. On November 5, 2009, a month after the body was discovered, detectives returned to Claude LaRouche's house. This time, however, it was not for a conversation. DNA analysis revealed that the seminal fluid found in Natasha Conoyer's body matched LaRouche's. Additionally, Natasha's DNA was detected in the motel room Claude rented and inside his car. Montreal police say there's no link between the crime and Conoyer's job at Correctional Service of Canada, and the victim didn't know the suspect. Following Claude's arrest, Montreal Police Inspector Daniel Rousseau stated that citizens could now feel safer in public. The news of the arrest shocked Claude's neighbors, who described him as a friendly and polite individual. The next day, on November 6, 2009, Claude LaRouche became a suspect in Natasha Conoyer's case. Initially, he denied any wrongdoing, but faced with substantial evidence, he confessed to taking Natasha's life. However, he claimed her death was accidental and not intentional. During his 2011 trial, two differing accounts of the events emerged, one from Claude and his defense team, and the other from the prosecution. According to Claude's testimony, he was waiting in a parking lot for a drug dealer on the evening in question. While sitting in his car, Natasha appeared beside him. He then attacked her, forced her into his vehicle, and shut the door. Afterwards, Claude conversed with Natasha, and she allegedly agreed to accompany him to a motel. Claude LaRouche experienced memory lapses, which left him unable to recall why he stood in the parking lot for 20 minutes or what he did during that time. However, he conveniently remembered specific moments that worked in his favor. According to LaRouche, Natasha offered to satisfy his demands in exchange for her freedom while they were in the motel room. He agreed, but after she fulfilled his requests, they got into an argument. Claude lost control, attacked Natasha, and ultimately strangled her. He then cleaned the room, moved her body to his car, drove home, and went to bed. The next morning, after the substances he had taken wore off, he realized the gravity of his actions. Claude chose to get rid of Natasha's body. As he drove to the location where the body was later found, he cut her documents and bank cards into pieces and threw them out the car window. However, it's crucial to remember that this account comes from LaRouche himself, and the more he shared, the more inconsistencies and questions emerged about his claims. According to Claude's testimony, the day after disposing of Natasha's body, he returned to the scene and covered her with a blanket, fearing she would freeze. He revisited the body again the next day to retrieve the blanket, worried that it would hinder her discovery. LaRouche's statements suggest that his actions were influenced by a clouded consciousness, leading to illogical decisions. He claimed he did not intend to take Natasha's life, which he attempted to convey to those present during the trial. The prosecution's case relied on physical evidence and a witness testimony. The witness stated that while walking his dog near the parking lot on the day Natasha disappeared, he saw Claude attempt to attack a jogger around 7 p.m. However, Claude retreated when he noticed the witness and his dog. Natasha Conoyer was attacked an hour later. The prosecutor was convinced that Claude had bound and abducted Natasha, taking her to a motel where she ultimately lost her life. In June 2011, Claude LaRouche was found guilty and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. During the trial, it was revealed that just 2 weeks after Natasha's murder, Claude attempted to strangle another woman, Dominique Martel. However, she managed to fend him off by biting his finger. As a result, Claude was deemed a dangerous offender under Canadian law, rendering his prison sentence indefinite and significantly reducing his chances of early parole. Natasha had a peaceful and fulfilling life, with aspirations and objectives, all of which were brutally taken away by a man with a history of serious crimes. Despite his past, Claude was allowed to roam free, living among the community without adequate supervision. The fact that he had previously attempted to kidnap a 7-year-old girl raises questions about how he was able to reintegrate into society without proper monitoring. Natasha's loved ones continue to grapple with these unanswered questions, haunted by the thought that if the system had functioned correctly and Claude had been held accountable, Natasha might still be alive today. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery, the case of Mitzi Sanchez. Mitzi Sanchez was born on August 10, 1992, in Vallejo, California. She grew up in a large, with 2 brothers and a sister. As a child, Mitzi was cheerful and bright, enjoying time outdoors with friends and playing with her siblings. From a young age, she demonstrated independence, often walking to elementary school with her brother without adult supervision, as the school was nearby. On August 10, 2000, Mitzi's 8th birthday, she was excited about the celebration party her family had planned. However, when she asked her mom if she could skip school, the request was denied. Upset, Mitzi left her home with her brother at around 7:30 a.m. The plan was for her to wait for her brother after classes, and they would walk home together. But when her brother went outside the school, he couldn't find Mitzi. Assuming she had already left without him, he headed home alone. However, when he arrived home, Mitzi had disappeared without a trace. Mitzi's older sister grew concerned when she realized Mitzi was missing, especially since her birthday party was supposed to take place that day. As her absence seemed unusual, the sister called their mother around 4 p.m. to report the situation. The mother immediately contacted Mitzi's school and confirmed that Mitzi had attended all her classes that day. However, when the mother reached out to family members and Mitzi's friends, no one had seen her after school. Mitzi's family became worried and started looking for her. Family, friends, and neighbors mounted a massive search operation. Some walked the streets, while others went door to door along the route from her home to school, asking locals if they had seen her. They also distributed flyers with information about Mitzi. Despite their extensive efforts, they were unable to find her, leading Mitzi's parents to call 911 for assistance. The police quickly joined the search and local media started covering the case. The news of Mitzi's disappearance spread quickly, not just in local news outlets but also across the state. Mitzi's family has given several interviews to raise awareness of her disappearance. Her mother desperately pleaded with them to return her daughter safely. The police received a lot of information, but none of it was useful. 24 hours after Mitzi went missing, the investigation had new clues. A man contacted the police to report finding bloody rags at a landfill. After further examination, experts discovered that the rags were actually bed sheets from a hotel in Vallejo. The evidence was sent to the lab for analysis, but it would take several days to obtain the results. Investigators also went to the hotel, but they were unable to confirm whether Mitzi was there. As the investigators waited for the lab results, they thoroughly searched the landfill for any additional clues, but they found nothing. However, the next day, August 12th, the police received a call that changed the course of the investigation. At around 11 a.m., a man called the police to report a disturbing incident. While driving through an industrial area in Santa Clara, he saw a little girl running towards his van, screaming that someone was chasing her. The girl quickly got into the van, and the driver saw a man running in their direction. A young girl escaped from her kidnapper and sought help from a van driver. As soon as she got into the truck, the kidnapper quickly fled the scene. The girl, who identified herself as Mitzi Sanchez, told the driver what had happened, and he immediately contacted the police. The officers quickly took Mitzi to a hospital for a medical examination. They also arranged for her to speak with her mother over the phone, and soon her relatives arrived at the hospital, where they were reunited with Mitzi. The van driver proved to be a valuable witness in the investigation. He was able to provide the police with the license plate number of the kidnapper's vehicle, which he had seen as it sped away. The truck driver happened to be on the road that day, which was lucky. If he hadn't been there, the kidnapper might have caught up with Mitzi. The police checked the license plate and discovered that the car belonged to 39-year-old Curtis Dean Anderson, a man with a history of crime. He had previous convictions for theft and kidnapping and was also suspected of other offenses. Police took a statement from Mitzi about what happened to her. Mitzi recounted that on August 10th, she was excited to finish school and head home to celebrate her birthday with her family. When her last class ended, she decided not to wait for her brother and walked home alone. As she walked, she noticed a car parked by the side of the road about a few hundred yards away. Inside, a man was watching her through the rearview mirror. The girl felt uncomfortable, but she was not worried because it was daytime and she was walking on a familiar street. In addition, because she was young, she was not aware of the potential risks posed by strangers. Mitzi was approached by a man who got out of his car and asked for her help. He claimed to have a leg injury from an accident and needed assistance in retrieving a roll of tape from under the car seat. Despite feeling uneasy, Mitzi agreed to help, as her parents had taught her to assist others in need. However, as soon as Mitzi reached for the tape, the man's intentions became clear. He pushed her into the car, covered her mouth, and slammed the door shut. Mitzi tried to scream, but it was too late. The man drove away, Mitzi to watch in horror as they passed by her home, where her family was preparing to celebrate her birthday. The man eventually stopped in a deserted parking lot, where he gave Mitzi new clothes and forced her to change. He then threw away her old clothes in a nearby trash bin. He warned Mitzi not to try to escape, claiming he had a gun and that no one had ever managed to escape from him. For the next few hours, Mitzi was driven to an unknown location. Mitzi demanded to know why she had been kidnapped. But the man's response was that he had gone through a similar experience as a child. When night fell, he stopped the car again and began covering the windows with rags to conceal their location. He then shackled Mitzi's leg with a chain and padlock. The man pulled out a bottle of alcohol and insisted that Mitzi drink some. Despite her initial reluctance, she eventually gave in. He took pictures of her using a camera. The perpetrator then lay down in the car to sleep. Fearing that she would be at his mercy if she fell asleep, Mitzi stayed awake and began thinking of an escape plan. Her chance came when she saw a police car driving past the parking lot. However, it was too far away, and she realized that even if she screamed, the officers would not be able to hear her. The next day, the perpetrator continued to drive Mitzi around the city, forcing her to sit on the floor of the car and covering her with sheets to conceal her from view. At one point, he briefly stepped out of the vehicle, giving Mitzi an opportunity to try and escape. She attempted to free her leg from the chain but quickly realized it was impossible. She also found a nail file and tried to use it to unlock the padlock, but unfortunately, it didn't work. When the perpetrator returned to the car and drove away, he made a disturbing claim. He had stopped by Mitzi's parents' house. Under the guise of a good citizen, he asked for flyers to distribute around town, further manipulating the situation. Mitzi was left feeling shocked and overwhelmed, knowing she had been so close to home yet still remained in captivity. Over the next few hours, the perpetrator repeatedly stopped the car, getting in and out. Eventually, he drove to a remote area outside of town and parked. There, he committed a sexual assault against Mitzi, leaving her in a state of shock. Afterward, the perpetrator fell asleep. The next morning, he resumed driving, making several stops to buy cigarettes and alcohol. When he returned to the car and leaned into the cabin, an object fell out of his pocket. He warned Mitzi not to look, but she disobeyed. She glanced down and saw a large set of keys. Mitzi quickly realized that one of the keys could open the lock on her chain. Although afraid of the perpetrator's possible reaction, Mitzi was brave enough to act. She grabbed the keys, selected one that seemed to fit the lock best, and tried to unlock it. To her relief, the key worked. Mitzi managed to free herself from the chain and moved towards the car door, which was the last barrier between her and freedom. To escape, she opened the window and tried to climb out. However, her body was exhausted, and her legs had almost no strength left. Using the last of my strength, she pushed herself upwards and finally jumped out of the car. As she moved around it, she spotted her kidnapper, who instantly saw her as well. He yelled for her to come back, but Mitzi had no intention of surrendering. She took off in the opposite direction, and her kidnapper started chasing after her. As she fled, she attempted to get help from passing cars by waving her hands and screaming, but all the cars ignored her pleas and kept driving by. Not losing hope, Mitzi kept running forward. In her desperate situation, every moment seemed like an eternity. Mitzi is driven by the fear that if she stops even for a moment, she will be captured by the perpetrator, a fate she is determined to avoid. Finally, she spotted a van and she ran towards it, jumping in front of it to stop the driver. The driver quickly halted, and Mitzi climbed into the cabin, exhausted, dehydrated, and starving, but safe. At the hospital, she received the medical attention she needed, and her family soon arrived to be reunited with her. Mitzi's story quickly became top news in town. When she returned home, thousands of people gathered on her street, cheering and shouting birthday wishes she had missed while in captivity. Meanwhile, the police were searching for her kidnapper, whose location remained unknown. During the investigation, the police showed Mitzi's mother a photo of the suspect, and she recognized him. She had seen him twice before, once before Mitzi's abduction, when he was standing on their street, staring at their house, and again the day after Mitzi's disappearance, when he came to their home asking for flyers. Police eventually arrested the suspect, Curtis. He confessed to Mitzi that she was not his first victim and that no one had ever managed to escape him before. Curtis's careful planning and execution suggested he had experience with similar crimes. It is notable that Curtis had a prior conviction for kidnapping a woman in 1991, for which he served time until his release in November 1999. The trial began in April of the same year. Mitzi bravely testified in a crowded courtroom, recounting every detail of Curtis's crimes against her. Even though Curtis was there, Mitzi remained calm and completed his mission. As a result, Curtis received a 251-year prison sentence. However, this marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. Detectives regularly visited Curtis in jail, questioning him about potential involvement in other crimes. One of these visits, they discovered that Curtis had confessed to a fellow inmate about kidnapping and murdering 8 additional girls. The inmate agreed to cooperate with the police, sharing Curtis's confession in detail. However, Curtis himself was reluctant to reveal all his secrets. Instead of denying the allegations, he attempted to negotiate privileges in exchange for information, speaking with detectives in riddles. As for Mitzi, she was constantly bullied and ridiculed by her classmates, labeling her the kidnapped girl. They even told her she should have died instead of being rescued. The constant bullying made her school years extremely difficult, which hindered her recovery from the traumatic experience. Mitzi could no longer handle the immense pressure. As a result, she turned to alcohol as a means of coping with stress, relying more and more on it. Eventually, she lost hope of returning to a normal life. However, a car accident after a party with friends changes her life forever. Mitzi suffered serious injuries, including a broken neck and arm, and spent 2 weeks in a coma. Upon waking up, she received news from her doctors. She was pregnant with a daughter. This gave Mitzi the power to change her life for the better. She decided to devote herself entirely to her daughter and also to helping other children who were victims of various crimes. Mitzi went on to found a non-profit organization that continues to help those in need to this day. As for Curtis, he passed away in 2007 due to illness, just 6 years after being sentenced. The detectives' only regret was that they were unable to obtain full confessions from him regarding other cases he was suspected of being involved in. Notably, his son followed a similar path and was also convicted of murder. Unfortunately, the son's life was cut short in prison in 2019. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Tara Lynn Grant. Tara Lynn Grant was born on June 22, 1972 in Michigan. She grew up on a farm with her parents and older sister. During her childhood, Tara enjoyed doing outdoor activities such as horseback riding and helping her family take care of farm animals. She was also very active in school sports, cheerleading, playing basketball and playing music in the school band. After completing high school, Tara decided to attend the University of Michigan. It was here that she met her boyfriend Steven and married him after graduating. Tara, after graduating, got a good job at a large international company. Meanwhile, Steven had been involved in politics as an assistant to a state senator. However, when the senator retired, Steven lost his job. Therefore, he decided to work at his father's small tool shop. After 4 years of marriage, Tara and Steven had a daughter, followed by a son a few years later. When their second child was born, they bought a new home in Monmouth County, Michigan, just outside of Detroit. Tara was successful in her career, but due to the nature of her work, she often traveled to different states and countries, leaving her with only weekends to spend with her family. As a result, Steven had to take on most of the responsibility for the children. His father's store job and the children's care were difficult for him. So they decided to hire a full-time nanny to help ease the burden. After a short time, they found the right person. They hired a young German woman who quickly bonded with their children and took on most of the childcare. Because of her work, Tara only came home on weekends, which led to more frequent arguments between them. Tara expected that after her next promotion, she would be able to adjust her schedule to spend more time at home with her family, but when she was promoted, she traveled for work almost every day. This continued until February 14, 2007, when something unexpected happened. On Valentine's Day, Steven reported to the police that Tara had been out of contact for 5 days. This was unusual because Tara was in constant contact with her family, especially when children were involved. Steven recounted the incident as follows. On the evening of February 9th, Tara returned home from a business trip and said she had to leave earlier than expected, staying home for only 1 day. This led to an argument, and Tara began packing her things. As she left the house, she told the driver of a dark-colored car, "I'll be waiting down the street." From then on, Tara was out of contact and did not return any calls. The police wondered why Steven waited 5 days to report the incident. Steven explained that he was not worried at first because he thought Tara had just left for work early as planned and had not contacted her because they had just had an argument. However, he became concerned when Tara did not contact her family for an extended period of time. Normally, when she was on a business trip, she would call her 2 young children, but this time she did not contact them. Furthermore, Tara's boss called Steven on Monday to say that she had not shown up for a meeting. This made him even more worried, and he was sure that Tara was missing. Steven called Tara's parents and told them about her lack of contact with home. However, the parents thought that Tara just needed time off after an argument with Steven. Previously, Tara had told her parents that her relationship with Steven was having difficulties due to work, and they argued frequently. Therefore, her relatives thought that Tara just wanted to temporarily leave and would return home when she had stabilized. As time passed and Tara still did not appear, and she did not answer any calls, Steven began to worry about her safety. He decided to contact the police for help. During the interrogation, the police noticed some suspicious scratches on Steven. They asked if the scratches were related to the argument with Tara. But Steven denied it. He explained that he often got injured while working at his father's store. After the interview, the police said they needed to search Steven's home, and he agreed. When they arrived, the police discovered that all of Tara's belongings were missing from the home, including her papers and wallet, along with her suitcase. Steven also gave them access to Tara's personal computer. The police checked it and found that there had been no bank transactions in the days after she disappeared. The police were surprised because Tara would have needed to pay for expenses if she had gone somewhere, such as buying a plane ticket or booking a hotel room. During the search of the home, the police found no signs of Tara's whereabouts after she disappeared. There was no evidence or clues. Therefore, the police decided to focus on determining what she had been doing and where she had been on February 9th. The area they live in is considered one of the safest in the country, and the local police department has little experience investigating similar disappearances. The police ask Stephen to take a lie detector test, but he refuses. Stephen insists that he would never harm his wife and becomes very emotional. The police then leave his home and consider their next steps. However, the next morning, Stephen contacts the police again and says he is willing to cooperate. However, a short time later, Stephen's lawyer contacts the police and says he has advised his agent not to cooperate with the police. Other than following the usual practice in such cases, they are unable to find any other leads. During the investigation, Tara's family, friends, and colleagues said they had not heard from her since February 9th and did not know where she might be. Additionally, her bank account had not recorded any significant transactions, although she needed to make some basic purchases. Police began to question Stephen and discovered that his driver's license had been revoked. However, Stephen continued to drive despite the ban. Police used this to arrest Stephen for driving without a license. After his arrest, Stephen claimed that the police were considering him a prime suspect in his wife's disappearance and refused to answer any questions. With the assistance of his lawyer, Stephen was released on bail and returned home. Police continued to investigate and requested Tara's cell phone records to gather more evidence. On the day Tara went missing, she made one last call. It was from the airport, in which she told Stephen that she would be home soon. Stephen then called her repeatedly, but all the calls went to voicemail. The police listened to these recordings and found that Stephen asked Tara to answer or call back. He claimed that Tara did not care about the children and asked her to come home for the children. However, Tara's cell phone was turned off and was last connected to a cell tower near her home on the evening of her disappearance. It is worth noting that the police did not find any incoming calls to Tara at that time, although Stephen said that someone had called her before she left the house and said that the person would be waiting for her on the street. Stephen was really worried about his wife and at the same time angry at Tara's actions of abandoning their children. Although the police were investigating him, they could not find any new traces. Stephen still refused to cooperate with the police, accusing them of wasting time suspecting him instead of looking for Tara. During this time, Stephen actively appeared in the media. Tara's mysterious disappearance attracted a lot of attention from many people, and in front of the camera, Stephen begged her to return home safely. When the company that Stephen and Tara hired the nanny learned about the case, they decided to send the nanny back to Germany. Before leaving, the nanny reported to the police about her working hours at their house. The nanny said that on the evening Tara came home, she went to a bar with her friends. When the nanny returned home, she met Stephen, who seemed sad and said that Tara had just left home. Although Stephen refused to cooperate with the police, he hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent, to investigate the case. However, this investigator also failed to find Tara. The police decided to change their approach and contacted the nanny agency that employed Tara and Stephen. They discovered an important piece of information. Before hiring the German nanny, they had a total of 6 other nannies, but none of them had worked there long term. Police interviewed the nannies, most of whom said Stephen behaved strangely and unnervingly. They said he would rummage through their belongings, ask personal questions, and verbally abuse them. The police began investigating why the last nanny from Germany had a completely different description of her time with the family. They had only heard good things about Stephen. To clarify the matter, the police monitored the nanny's emails and phone calls. This led to an unexpected piece of information. The police discovered text messages between her and Stephen, which showed that they had been in a relationship. It was learned that the 19-year-old had been having an affair with him during Tara's business trips and that the relationship continued until she quit her job and had to leave the country. Although this was an important clue, the police could not yet conclude that Stephen was involved in Tara's disappearance. Therefore, they continued to look for other evidence. During the investigation, the police talked to Tara's relatives and friends and found that most of them did not like Stephen because of his strange behavior. They believed that Stephen wanted to control Tara's every move and often caused conflicts with her family. The police also found another important piece of information. Stephen's ex-girlfriend, whom he had dated before meeting Tara, contacted the police and revealed something surprising. According to her, Stephen contacted her again a few months ago, and their conversations gradually became intimate. Eventually, Stephen expressed his desire to start a romantic relationship with her, even though they were both married to other people. Stephen also complained about Tara and her frequent absences. He suspected that she was cheating on him with her boss. To verify this, he installed tracking software on her computer, allowing him to read her messages, but he found no evidence of Tara's infidelity. This information made the police even more suspicious of her husband's involvement in Tara's disappearance. However, the police still needed more evidence. Since it had been several weeks since Tara went missing, they began to consider the possibility that she was no longer alive and began an extensive search for her body. Police, along with volunteers, began searching the area around Tara's house and a large park nearby for several miles. However, the search lasted for several days and still yielded no results. But everything changed on February 28th. A woman walking in the park discovered something strange under a tree along the path. A plastic bag was covered with branches and snow, but it was clear that there was still something inside. Therefore, she decided to examine the bag closely. When she looked into the bag, she discovered rubber gloves and metal fragments along with a dark red substance at the bottom of the bag. She called the police to report the incident, and she decided to keep the bag and turn it in to the police. Police suspected the dark red substance could be blood, so they sent the bag to a lab for testing. However, due to the large workload, experts said the DNA analysis could take up to 2 months. In the meantime, experts have tested the bag and confirmed that the dark red substance is indeed human blood. The police focused all their efforts on the area where the bag was found, mobilizing all resources to investigate. Meanwhile, Stephen did not participate in the search. Instead, Stephen spent his time giving an interview to a news channel, giving many suspicious answers. Stephen repeatedly criticized Tara for being away from home so often. He called her a bad mother and claimed that he shouldered most of the responsibility for taking care of the children. When the reporter asked about their financial situation and whether he was living off Tara's money, Stephen became angry. He insisted that he did not need a single penny from Tara. During the interview, Stephen accused Tara of having an affair but did not provide any evidence. He repeatedly criticized Tara. The police obtained a search warrant for Tara and Stephen's home. The police arrived at Stephen's home. At the same time, Stephen returned from an interview with a reporter. The police informed him of the search warrant for his home. Stephen opened the door for them and then called his lawyer. The lawyer asked the police if Stephen was under arrest. The police replied that he was not. Stephen then said that he was going to walk his dog and left. During that time, the police searched each room in the house. They eventually arrived at the garage and found a large green bin containing several plastic bags. When they opened one of the plastic bags, they found an unknown substance and women's clothing. When the police opened the other bag, they discovered that it contained human remains. After examining a total of 5 bags in the bin, the police quickly confirmed that they contained the remains of a woman. Police believed they had found Tara's body and suspected Stephen of being her killer. However, Stephen did not appear, so the police immediately launched a search for him to prevent him from fleeing or causing harm to others. Meanwhile, the police requested reinforcements to search the park for Tara's remains as more remains were still missing from the garage. Over 100 police officers from neighboring counties were called in to assist in the search, and their efforts soon paid off. A few hundred meters from where the bag was found, the police found another body part. Then they found the head. Due to the cold weather, the rest of the body was quite well preserved, helping the police confirm that it was Tara. The police continued to search and found some more body parts. However, in the evening, the search had to be stopped until the next morning. During this time, the police also tried to locate Stephen but were unsuccessful. They contacted his friends, and one of them revealed that Stephen had called him, informing him that the police were searching at Stephen's house and asking to pick him up on the way. Stephen's friend came to pick him up and took him home. On the way, he noticed that Stephen's behavior was very strange. He seemed scared, his hands were shaking, and he seemed very depressed. When Stephen arrived at his friend's house, Stephen said he wanted to see his children and borrowed a car from his friend. However, Stephen's children were at his sister's house in another state at the time. The friend agreed to lend him the pickup truck, and Stephen left. In order to track Stephen, the police requested his phone and credit card information. This helped them quickly determine Stephen's travel route. By monitoring his withdrawals and calls to his sister, the police realized that Stephen was on his way to see his children. Realizing this, the police immediately set out to track him. An unexpected event occurred. The police received a call from a German woman with whom Stephen had a relationship. The woman said that Stephen had just contacted her and confessed to killing his wife, Tara. According to him, they had argued that night and he became violent after Tara slapped him. In a fit of rage, Stephen pushed Tara and she fell to the floor, resulting in her death from head injuries. After this confession, the police no longer had any doubts about Stephen's guilt. However, they still needed to catch him. For hours, they searched the area along the highway leading to the neighboring state. They eventually found Stephen's car near the entrance to the national park, but he himself was nowhere to be found. The police searched the area, and after several hours of searching, they found Stephen using a thermal imaging camera. He was lying under a tree, wearing light clothing and in a dangerous state of hypothermia. The officers noticed that he was suffering from an unusual condition, often talking to trees and mumbling incomprehensible sentences. Fearing that he was in danger, the officers quickly airlifted him to the hospital. At that time, his body temperature was only 88 degrees Fahrenheit, but doctors were able to save him. However, he needed time to fully recover. While Stephen was in the hospital, he was charged with murder and the case was transferred to court. Interestingly, on the same day, Stephen's attorney refused to defend him. When asked why, Stephen's attorney gave a vague answer. A new attorney was then appointed for Stephen. Meanwhile, forensic pathologists began investigating Tara's remains. One of the most experienced pathologists in the country, who had worked on such high-profile cases as the JFK case and the JonBenet Ramsey case, was appointed as the chief medical examiner. After examining Tara's remains, the chief medical examiner concluded that Stephen's story did not match the facts. According to Stephen, Tara died of head trauma, but the investigation actually showed that Tara's cause of death was strangulation. When Stephen recovered, the police came to the hospital to see him and he told them what happened that night. The incident started when Tara returned and said she had to leave a day early. This led to a heated argument between the two. In a fit of rage, Stephen attacked Tara. She tried to leave, but he held her back. Tara defended herself by punching Stephen in the face, which angered him and he attacked her. The incident escalated when Stephen yelled at and strangled Tara. He then dragged her body down the second floor to the garage and put her in the trunk of his car. Meanwhile, the nanny returned home. To cover up his crime, Stephen told her that Tara had left him. The next day, he took the body to his father's workshop while making sure no one else was there. To cover his tracks, Stephen destroyed all of Tara's documents and personal belongings, then used a saw to cut her body into pieces. A few hours later, he packed the remains into plastic bags, placed them in a container, and returned home, leaving the body in his car for several days. He pondered how to dispose of the remains while creating an alibi for himself. He repeatedly called Tara and left messages on her voicemail, begging her to come home. Stephen took his son's sled and went to the park. There, he placed the container containing Tara's remains on the sled and began pulling it up a hill to avoid the crowded area. However, the rope he was pulling the sled with was not secure, and it slipped out of his hands. The sled began to roll down, the container tipped over, and the bags containing the remains spilled out. After picking up the bags, Stephen put the container back on the sled, and after a while, he found a remote place to bury the bags under the snow. He then left the park. A few days after he left, the police began looking for Tara, and the detectives announced that they would begin a search in the area of the park where Stephen had buried the bags. Stephen became panicked, remembering that the largest bag had been poorly hidden and could soon be discovered. To avoid this, he decided to move the bags to a safer place. Stephen went to the park, picked up a few bags, shouldered them, and carried them to his father's workshop, placing them on the roof. The next day, before going to the interview, he took the box from home, went to the workshop to carry the bags back to his garage. However, the next day, the police obtained a search warrant for the house. There, they found the bags in the box. When the situation became clear, Stephen confessed that he had not originally planned to surrender. During his conversation with the police, Stephen showed no remorse for his crimes. Instead, he often smiled and joked even as he described the process of hiding and disposing of the body. While Stephen awaited trial in prison, his children continued to live with his sister. This did not please Tara's family. Despite this, Stephen's sister continued to keep in touch with him, even feeling sorry for him and responding to jokes about Tara's murder. Tara's family eventually won custody of the children, but Stephen's family was still allowed to see them. In November 2007, Stephen's trial began. However, he did not deny his guilt. His new attorney then tried to get Stephen to get a reduced sentence. The attorney explained that Stephen and Tara's troubled marriage and Tara's frequent absences were the main reasons for Stephen's crime. During the trial, Stephen had lied about Tara's plans to come home a day earlier. Tara's sister, who had spoken to her before the murder, also confirmed this information. During that conversation, Tara told her sister that she would be home soon after that, as she did every week. There was no evidence that Tara had lied to her husband. Tara's boss said that Tara's relationship with the man was purely business, which was confirmed by their emails and text messages. The prosecution failed to prove that Stephen had planned the murder in advance. He had clearly committed the crime in a fit of rage, which could have resulted in a second-degree murder charge instead of a first-degree one. On December 21, 2007, the jury unanimously found Stephen guilty and he was sentenced to a minimum of 50 years in prison. Stephen's attorney attempted to appeal the verdict, but to no avail. He has since served time behind bars. But his story didn't end there. Tara's murder captured the attention of millions across the country, and Stephen clearly enjoyed it. While in prison, he began writing a book and begged to have it published with the help of his sister. They even discussed the possibility of turning it into a movie, and Stephen considered which famous actor could play him. In 2008, something else came to light. Stephen's children told their aunt that they had actually seen their father kill their mother that evening. They came out of the room after hearing screams and witnessed the whole thing. When this information appeared in the media, Stephen's relatives accused the children of lying and continued to protect him. That same year, it was revealed that Stephen's father, unlike other relatives, did not support him, could not live with what his son had done, and Stephen's father's body was found in his home. To this day, Stephen remains behind bars and will only be eligible for parole in 2058. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Johnny Berry. Johnny Berry was born on August 26, 1983, and grew up to be a happy and friendly person with a large social circle and a love for parties. During her school days, she was an active member of the local cheerleading team. After completing high school, Johnny enrolled at East Tennessee State University to pursue a degree in psychology and criminology. It was during this period that she met Jason White, and they began dating. The couple got engaged just before graduating in late 2004. At the age of 21, Johnny decided to pursue a master's degree in psychology, which led her to temporarily relocate to Knoxville for her studies. While in Knoxville, she worked part-time at a children's educational center, where she discovered her passion for helping kids. Meanwhile, Johnny's fiancé, Jason, was studying law in a different state. Despite the distance, they remained close and began planning their wedding in Knoxville. Initially, Johnny stayed with her friend, Jason Amami, who had also attended college with her and later moved to Knoxville. They shared a 2-bedroom apartment, and Jason allowed Johnny to stay there until she found her own place to live. Johnny had 2 part-time jobs, one at a jewelry store and the other at a children's hospital. On the Sunday night of December 5th, after finishing her shift at the jewelry store, Johnny went to the mall to do some Christmas shopping. Later, she returned home and spent her evening wrapping presents for the children at the educational center, chatting with her neighbor, and then retreating to her room. Before going to bed, she had a phone conversation with her boyfriend. Around 4 in the morning, Jason Amami was awoken by a scream from a woman. At first, he thought Johnny was having a nightmare, so he went to her room to check on her. However, he was shocked to find a stranger wielding a knife. The intruder attacked Jason, and they engaged in a fierce struggle. Eventually, Jason managed to fend off the attacker and made a dash for the door. He rushed out of the apartment and ran to the nearest convenience store, almost a kilometer away, to call for help. When the store clerk saw Jason, who was covered in blood, they immediately called 911. Jason explained to the police what had happened when they arrived at the scene. At their apartment, the police found Johnny lying in the hallway that connected 5 apartments. She was still alive, but barely conscious. When the police questioned her about the attacker, she could only provide weak clues. The police searched the entire building and the surrounding area, but were unable to find the attacker. They rushed Johnny to the nearest hospital, where despite the doctor's best efforts, they were unable to save her. The doctor reported that she had suffered more than 20 stab wounds, making survival highly unlikely. Jason had 8 wounds from the attacker. Although only 1 was critical, he received medical attention, and his life was no longer in danger. Meanwhile, the detectives began investigating the crime scene. They discovered blood in the hallway, indicating that Johnny had attempted to seek help from her neighbors, but none of them had opened their doors. Next to Johnny's room, the detectives found the murder weapon, a kitchen knife that belonged to Jason, which the attacker had used with such force that it became bent and damaged. The police discovered blood near the back door of the apartment and on the stairs leading to the street. As Jason and Johnny had exited through the front door, detectives believed the killer likely escaped through the back door in Jason's room. Another clue was found, a partial footprint, possibly left by the attacker when they followed Jason and attacked him. The brutal nature of Johnny's murder led police to suspect a personal motive. Initial investigations focused on Johnny's boyfriend, despite him being approximately 1,000 kilometers away from Knoxville. However, Friends and family testified to their wonderful relationship, and he had no apparent reason to commit such a heinous crime. He learned of Jonia's death when her mother called him at 10 a.m. and claimed to have fainted and taken a long time to recover. In his incapacitated state, he required a neighbor's assistance to book a plane ticket and pack his suitcase. After carefully verifying his alibi, investigators concluded he couldn't have physically traveled to Knoxville and back by morning, thus ruling him out as a suspect and shifting their attention to Jonia's neighbor. In contrast to Jonia's boyfriend, who had a solid alibi, this particular neighbor did not, which raised suspicions that he might be the perpetrator. Many friends and family members of Jonia suspected him, with some believing he could be the killer, and others accusing him of leaving Jonia behind as he fled the apartment. The suspicion was so deep-seated that Jonia's parents didn't even want him to attend her funeral. After Jason was released from the hospital, investigators started questioning him. He maintained his original story, stating that he had heard screams, seen an unfamiliar man, and was attacked after successfully fighting off the attacker. Jason rushed to the front door, went out into the street, and sought help from the neighbors. He thought Jonia had also escaped from the apartment because he could no longer hear her screams. However, the police had doubts about the truth of this testimony. Doubts about Jason initially stemmed from his injuries. Although he had 8 wounds, 7 were superficial, and the 8th on his right arm could have been sustained while either defending himself or attacking someone. Furthermore, the absence of forced entry into the apartment suggested that the assailant might have already been inside. Jason claimed to have taken out the trash through the back door that night, but he couldn't recall whether he had locked it. The detectives pressed him further, focusing on which door he used to exit the apartment onto the street. Jason maintained that he had left through the front door, but the police suspected he was lying. If Jason had actually exited through the back door, it would account for the bloodstains near the door leading to the stairs, thereby heightening suspicions against him. Additionally, the police accused him of using and selling illegal drugs and of becoming aggressive when he couldn't get his fix. Jason denied all these allegations, but the investigators continued to level various charges against him. After spending several hours at the police station, the detectives asked Jason to take a polygraph test, and to their surprise, he accepted. An expert was brought in to administer the test, during which Jason was asked a series of leading questions. When the test was over, the investigators told him that he had failed, suggesting that his responses were false. This news caused Jason to become extremely upset, shouting that he was innocent and had no involvement in the crime, that his life was in danger, and that the real perpetrator was still at large. Despite his protests, the detectives remained skeptical. Police couldn't charge Jason due to lack of evidence. Lab analysis of the murder weapon revealed 3 DNA samples: the victim's, Jason's, and an unknown man's. The unknown DNA was also found elsewhere in the apartment. A bloody fingerprint on the knife handle didn't match Jason's. These findings suggested another person was present, but the unknown DNA didn't match any in the database. Despite this, public opinion still doubted Jason's innocence. Jason developed PTSD after a flawed polygraph test led to false accusations. In reality, Jason had severe lung and neck injuries with little hope of recovery. However, due to police report inaccuracies, his treatment was only 25% covered, leaving him in financial distress. After the police stopped suspecting him, they started questioning Jason as a witness. Based on his account, they managed to create a rough description of the attacker. However, the situation was complicated by the fact that Jason didn't get a clear look at the assailant's face. The apartment was dimly lit, and the attacker had pounced on him as soon as he left the room. In Jonia's room, the investigators made an intriguing discovery. A cap was found near the back staircase, along with discs and a stereo player. At first, they thought these items might belong to Jonia or Jason, but Jason denied any connection to them, claiming they were not in his apartment. This led the investigators to suspect that the killer might have left them behind. The police released a rough sketch of the suspect to the media, and after it was published, they received hundreds of leads. Many people reported individuals who vaguely matched the sketch, prompting the detectives to investigate each of these leads. One lead in particular caught their attention: a group of local teenagers known to break into houses to steal. One of these teenagers, 19-year-old Michael, bore a resemblance to the suspect's sketch. The police launched a search for Michael, which was made more complicated by the fact that he was already wanted for theft. With the possibility of his involvement in murder, 2 police units joined the search for Michael. They tracked down Michael and brought him in for questioning about the murder. As soon as he was in custody, the investigators turned their attention to his shoes, which had a tread pattern that was similar to the footprint found at the crime scene. They took DNA and fingerprint samples from Michael and sent them to the lab for analysis. While waiting for the results, they questioned him, and he made a surprising confession. Michael claimed that he and a friend had broken into Gia's apartment that night, intending to steal valuables. However, he said his friend had taken a knife and attacked Gia. But the detectives soon grew suspicious of Michael's story. The details he provided didn't match the evidence they had collected, and there was no sign of 2 strangers at the crime scene. The lab results only added to their doubts. Michael's DNA and fingerprints didn't match those found at the murder scene, and his shoes didn't match the tread pattern found in Gia's room. In the end, the police concluded that Michael had made up the whole story. It may seem strange, but it's not uncommon for people to falsely confess to high-profile crimes, often to get attention or a reward. It's unclear what motivated Michael, but his confession turned out to be completely false. Following the murder, investigators questioned over 1,000 potential suspects and collected around 400 DNA samples. However, none of them matched the evidence found at the crime scene. In an effort to encourage people to come forward with information, a reward was offered early on in the investigation. As time went on, the reward amount increased each month. By December 2005, a year after the murder, the reward had reached $60,000. The state governor also contributed an additional $20,000 from his own funds, drawing even more public attention to the case. Despite the many leads, all of them ultimately led to dead ends. As a result, the case remained unsolved for several years. In 2007, the victim's parents took action seeking changes in state legislation. They found it surprising that the murderer's fingerprints and DNA were not in any databases, considering the brutality of the crime. The parents refused to believe that this was the perpetrator's first offense. They later discovered that, according to Tennessee laws, fingerprints and DNA samples were only collected from people who had been convicted of a crime. Jason's parents were determined to bring about change. They took an active role in shaping a new law that required the collection of DNA samples from all individuals arrested for violent crimes. The authorities backed this initiative, and the law was passed in May 2007. 2 months later, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. The police arrested 22-year-old Taylor Lee Olson for violating his probation terms. Olson had a lengthy criminal record, mainly involving theft, check forgery, and auto theft, with multiple previous arrests. Remarkably, despite his history of run-ins with the law, his fingerprints and DNA had never been collected. Olson lived with his girlfriend and their newborn daughter, but his criminal activities persisted. It was revealed that Olson had already come to the investigators' attention 5 months earlier when they received a tip about his possible involvement in the murder. However, for reasons unknown, the police had not pursued DNA samples for analysis at that time. Nevertheless, with his new arrest for probation violation, they finally decided to question him about Jonia's case. Olson eventually confessed his involvement in the murder and willingly provided a DNA sample. When the lab results came in, it was confirmed that Taylor's DNA was a complete match with the sample found in the victim's apartment. Following this, they collected his fingerprints, which also matched the fingerprint on the murder weapon. Olson was subsequently arrested, and detectives began to question him. Initially, Olson said he was not guilty, but he eventually decided to confess to his actions. Taylor claimed that on that night he had intended to steal Jonia's car and had entered her apartment through the back door to find the car keys. When he entered her room, she woke up and began screaming. In response, Olson grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times. However, he insisted that he hadn't intended to kill anyone and that it had all occurred accidentally. Detectives had doubts about the truthfulness of some details and leaned towards believing that Taylor had premeditated the murder. It was possible that he had been stalking the victim for some time, indirectly supported by the fact that Jonia's friends had reported someone following her in a car at the time. No evidence was found to substantiate this, but after Olson's arrest, it seemed increasingly plausible. Despite this, there was little doubt about his culpability, as his DNA and fingerprints were present on the murder weapon, strongly indicating his involvement. Olson's trial was slated to commence in mid-2008, and by that point, he had already retained a lawyer. Apparently, his legal counsel advised him to retract his confession, and Taylor presented a new version of events to the detectives. Now, he claimed that he had entered Jonia's apartment with his friend named Noah Cox. According to this revised account, when Olson entered Gia's room to retrieve the car keys, she allegedly woke up, seized a knife, and stabbed him several times. Olson then fled through the back door, while his friend entered Gia's room, disarmed her, and killed her. This new narrative raised suspicions among the police, as they found no fingerprints or DNA from other individuals at the crime scene, making it appear unlikely that anyone else was involved. Detectives awaited the start of the trial, but it never occurred. On March 28, 2008, Taylor Olson took his own life in his prison cell. Alongside him, several suicide notes were discovered, addressed to his family, Joan, his relatives, and the police. In the note to the detectives, he once again alleged that his friend Noah Cox was the actual perpetrator and also apologized to Gia's family and his own. Detectives continued to believe that Olson was responsible for the murder and repeatedly questioned him, but they found no evidence implicating him. Gia's parents also remained skeptical, believing that Olson was lying. In their view, if Taylor was truly innocent, he wouldn't have taken his own life. It seemed more likely that he simply did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Furthermore, for several months following his initial confession, Olson had consistently maintained that he had entered the apartment alone and that there was no one else with him. The sudden change in his story to shift blame onto his friend raised further doubts. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Heather Jackson. Heather Jackson, a 23-year-old mother of two, had just found a house on a quiet street near Lake Erie. She was thrilled to have a new place to call home, especially after separating from her husband Wayne and going through a divorce. Despite the challenges they faced as parents, Heather and Wayne were once a happy couple, but their marriage didn't survive the struggles. After the breakup, Heather faced tough times, but she didn't give up. She focused on making her children, 3-year-old Selena and 1-year-old Wayne Jr., happy. On September 8, 2012, Heather's friend Danielle arrived at a house at 2:30 p.m. as they had planned. However, when Danielle knocked on the door, no one answered. She checked all the doors, but they were locked. This was unusual, as Heather would normally let her know if she had to change plans. Danielle's concern grew as she realized Heather and her children were not at home. Danielle tried to reach Heather by calling her mother, Jody, but was unable to get in touch with her that day. Failing that, Danielle contacted all of Heather's friends, but none of them knew her whereabouts. Then Danielle spotted Selena's pacifier on the porch, which made her increasingly anxious. She knew Heather would never leave the house without it. As the hours ticked by with no call from Heather, Jody grew more and more uneasy, her intuition screaming warning signals. She decided to take action and phoned the police, asking them to perform a welfare check. When the officers arrived at the address, they knocked on the door, but received no response. Next, they made their way around the house, peering through the windows, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. With no signs of forced entry or any indication of foul play, they departed. At approximately 7:30 p.m., Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner, friends of Heather, arrived at her house, having learned that she was missing. They knocked on the front door, but there was no response. Reiner then proceeded to the back porch, forced open the door, and entered the home. Upon entering, they discovered Heather's lifeless body in the bedroom, completely naked, and immediately called the emergency services. Sergeant Eric Gray Bill, a police officer with the Sandusky Force, responded to the call and entered Heather Jackson's home. He found Heather's body awkwardly positioned between the box spring and mattress in her bedroom, with a ligature constricting her neck. Notably, the TV in the house was still operational, but the children were absent. Their room was empty. While inspecting the house, the officers came across a door to a utility closet that they hadn't checked yet. Upon opening it, Sergeant Eric Gray Bill was met with a horrific sight. Stacked boxes, and behind them, the lifeless bodies of Heather's children. The police immediately sealed off the area, treating it as a crime scene. The local officers were left stunned, having never encountered anything so heinous in their careers. The brutal murder of innocent children left them struggling to comprehend how someone could commit such an atrocity. The forensic examination results only added to the devastation felt by Heather's family and friends. According to court documents, Dr. Diana Scala Barnett, the deputy coroner for Lucas County, performed autopsies on the 3 victims. She determined that Heather Jackson's cause of death was ligature strangulation and observed that Heather's rectum was found to be more open than usual after death. Dr. Scala Barnett attributed this to the likely introduction of an object into the rectum around the time of death, which kept it in that state. Dr. Scala Barnett also testified that Wayne Jackson and Selena Jackson died from ligature strangulation. She noted that Selena's underwear had been rolled up, suggesting that the body had been redressed. Furthermore, Selena's rectum showed a similar dilation to her mother's, again indicating that an object was present in her rectum at or around the time of death. Julie Cox, a forensic scientist at the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, reported that the anal swabs taken from Selena Jackson contained seminal fluid. Cox also observed a suspicious stain on Selena Jackson's underwear, which she excised and tested, finding it to contain a sperm cell. The police were under pressure to swiftly identify and apprehend the culprit behind these heinous crimes. Heather's residence was conveniently located near Firelands Regional Medical Center, and investigators believed that surveillance footage from the building's CCTV cameras might aid in their search for the perpetrator. Upon reviewing the footage, they spotted a car pulling up to Heather's house at 10:57 p.m. However, the camera's distance from the house and the darkness hindered visibility. The car's headlights provided the only clues, revealing that the vehicle had backed into the driveway and remained stationary for some time. 11 minutes later, at 11:08 p.m., the headlights flickered back to life, and the driver departed the scene. Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner, the 2 men who found Heather's body, were taken to the police station for questioning. Dan, who had been friends with Heather, was the first to be interrogated. He explained that when he learned Heather was missing, he went to her house to check on her. Dan admitted that he had to push the door hard to gain entry, and as a result, the police asked him to provide DNA samples. He consented, and a swab was taken from his mouth. After that, he was released. Next, the investigators questioned Thomas Hansen. He revealed that he had spoken to Heather over the phone the previous night and was near her house around 11 p.m. According to Thomas, he drove up to Heather's house, but didn't enter. They chatted briefly outside, and then he drove home. This information helped the investigators identify the car seen on the CCTV footage as belonging to Thomas. Thomas also claimed that he didn't enter Heather's house that night because she wasn't alone. There was a man, known to him as Josh, inside with her. Hansen's statement echoed Reiner's. He claimed that upon learning of Heather's disappearance, he rushed to her house to investigate. After providing a DNA sample, he was released by the police. The police shifted their focus to Josh, who was at Heather's house shortly before her death. They quickly determined his whereabouts and brought him in for questioning. Josh acknowledged having known Heather for several years. He confessed to being at her house that night, stating that they watched TV while the kids slept in their room. He also mentioned visiting the store to buy breakfast for the children, returning to the house and staying for a while before a friend picked him up around 1 a.m. Notably, Josh admitted to having consensual, intimate contact with Heather. The investigators visited the store where Josh claimed to have purchased breakfast for the kids and reviewed the CCTV footage. The footage confirmed Josh's alibi, showing him entering the store at 11:20 p.m. However, this did not rule out the possibility that he was involved in the crime. As the last known person to have contact with Heather, Josh remained the prime suspect. Josh also provided a DNA sample, which was analyzed along with those of Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner. The lab results cleared Hansen and Reiner, as their DNA did not match the DNA found on the victims' bodies. Josh's DNA, on the other hand, matched the DNA found on Heather's body, but not on her children's bodies. This indicated that there was another man present in the house that night. Josh had previously confessed to being in a romantic relationship with Heather, which accounted for his DNA being present on her body. However, the police were now tasked with identifying a different individual whose DNA matched the DNA found on the bodies of all three victims. The investigators quickly ruled out Heather's husband Wayne, who was in the process of divorcing her, as a suspect because he lived in a different state. The detectives then focused on Heather's cell phone records, hoping to find some answers. Upon receiving the report, they discovered that Heather had been very active on her phone, right up until the night of her death. Her last phone conversation took place at 3:12 a.m. and lasted 30 seconds. The police now needed to identify the owner of the phone number she had called. 36 hours after Heather's death, the police obtained additional CCTV footage. While analyzing it, the investigators noticed a white car pulling up to her house at around 3 a.m. This coincided with the time Heather stopped using her phone, which might not have been a coincidence. The officers also saw that the white car drove away about an hour later, around the time when Heather, Selena, and Wayne were likely already dead. Although the footage quality was poor and didn't allow the police to see the license plates, they were able to determine that the car was a Cadillac. Once the investigators received information from the phone company about the owner of the phone number Heather had called, they had a lead. The number belonged to 41-year-old Curtis Clinton. It was with him that Heather had her 30-second phone conversation at 3:12 a.m. Curtis Clinton's background check revealed alarming details. Police records showed that Clinton was released from prison in February after serving a 13-year sentence for 2 counts of felonious assault and involuntary manslaughter. He had pleaded guilty to the 1997 murder of 18-year-old Misty Keckler from Fostoria, who was found strangled, naked, and bound in a bathtub. The similarity to Heather's case, combined with the fact that Clinton was released from prison just 6 months prior to Heather and her children's death, raised concerns among investigators. It seemed possible that Clinton had reverted to his previous violent behavior. Furthermore, Clinton owned a white Cadillac, which made him the prime suspect. The police urgently needed to locate him to prevent any further harm. If Clinton was indeed responsible for the murders, he had to be stopped before he could harm anyone else. The police went to Clinton's last known address, but he was not there. A few hours later, a patrol officer found a white Cadillac on a nearby street, but Clinton himself was still missing. A search of the vehicle revealed a receipt from a gas station on the night of the crime. The investigators headed to the gas station to review the CCTV footage. On the recordings, they identified Clinton and his distinctive white Cadillac. Despite already knowing that Heather and her children were deceased, Clinton was seen purchasing water and beer, displaying a calm demeanor. Fearing Clinton might flee, the investigators nonetheless soon received a tip that a patient named Curtis Clinton had been admitted to a local hospital. They swiftly arrived at the hospital and apprehended the suspect they were pursuing. Clinton was arrested and taken into custody, but he vehemently denied any involvement in the tragic deaths of Heather Jackson and her children. During questioning, Clinton revealed that he had been in a romantic relationship with Heather for 5 months, providing her with both financial and emotional support to cope with her numerous personal issues. Clinton claimed to have limited knowledge of Heather's children and stated that he last saw Heather on Tuesday, September 6th. He alleged that on that day, he gave her $328 and they engaged in an intimate encounter. The investigator told Clinton that phone records revealed a 3:12 a.m. call with Heather on September 8th. Clinton corrected himself, saying he had gotten his days wrong, and it was actually Friday night or early Saturday morning when he last saw Heather, not Thursday night. According to Clinton, he didn't stay at her house for long, dropping off the money and engaging in intimate contact before leaving. He explained, "I did my thing and left, but couldn't recall what time he got home." Clinton claimed that someone else must have gone to Heather's house after he left. He said that while he was with Heather, she mentioned that somebody had texted or called her, and she seemed irritated. When informed that he was the last person who had contact with Heather, Clinton denied. However, the examination indicated the opposite. The DNA on the bodies of all 3 victims belonged to Curtis Clinton. Therefore, he was arrested and placed in the county jail. Curtis Clinton was charged with multiple counts during the investigation. It also turned out that 6 days before the death of Heather and her children, Curtis Clinton attacked a 17-year-old girl whose identity was not disclosed by the police. He choked her and forced her to have intimate contact with him. When he let her go, she went to the hospital, and the police at the hospital doctors took DNA samples from her body, which also led to Curtis Clinton. Clinton moved for a change of venue, arguing that extensive media coverage had saturated the county at the time of the offenses, and was likely to resume once the trial started. The trial court denied the motion for a change of venue, stating that while the pre-trial publicity was extensive and adverse to the defendant, the publicity was not sufficiently prejudicial that readers and viewers could not realistically shut it from sight. The court rejected claims of presumed prejudice, stating that the defendant, Curtis Clinton, did not hesitate to take the lives of Heather, Selena, and Wayne, and that his DNA was found inside Selena's body before she died. Clinton knew he was facing the death penalty, but he did not want to die and therefore did everything to achieve a different outcome in the trial. He even remembered what justice was when allowed to speak before being sentenced for the capital crimes. Clinton neither begged for his life nor apologized to the victim's family. Instead, he lashed out at the prosecutor, Kevin Baxter, and vowed he would win on appeal and have his case retried. He stated, "I don't respect the prosecutor, and as I said, I will be back again. I know there's a lot of people who are upset here, but I'm the one who's going through this." This statement triggered a disgusted response from some of the 70 people present at the hearing in November 2013. Curtis Clinton was given the death penalty for the murders of Heather Jackson and her 2 young children. When he learned he would be executed by lethal injection, Clinton became violent towards Heather's brother, who expressed a preference for Clinton to die in prison at the hands of other inmates. Deputies and court staff restrained Clinton, who was handcuffed, and pushed him into a chair, while other officers restrained Heather's brother as they exchanged profanities in a packed Erie County courtroom. Heather's brother was angry, stating that the only thing Clinton should be grateful for is that his life was spared by being placed on death row, and that he wished Clinton had been given a life sentence in prison, allowing his friends to harm him. The judge also sentenced Clinton to life in prison without parole for the murder of 3-year-old Selena, and an additional 10 years in prison for assaulting a 17-year-old girl 6 days before the murder of Heather and her children. In 2018, the Ohio Supreme Court postponed Curtis Clinton's execution, which was scheduled for September 15, 2021, pending the exhaustion of all state post-conviction proceedings, including any appeals. As of now, Curtis Clinton remains on death row, and his sentence has been upheld, but his execution will not take place in the near future. Ohio is currently holding over 100 inmates on death row, but Governor Mike DeWine is doubtful that any of them will be executed in the remaining 3 years of his term. The last execution in the state took place on July 18, 2018, and since then, Ohio has had an effective halt on capital punishment. According to Governor DeWine, the reason for this is that lethal injection is the only approved method of execution in Ohio. But pharmaceutical companies have threatened to retaliate if the state uses their products for this purpose. This would have a significant impact on the state's health department and other agencies. The governor has told the state legislature that the only way to resume executions is to change the law to permit alternative methods of execution. But so far, the legislature has not taken any action, and DeWine does not expect them to do so. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Manjit Panghali. In every person's life, 2 decisions hold utmost significance: their career path and the choice of a life partner. Securing one's desired career alongside a caring and affectionate life companion can make life feel like a flawless masterpiece. Manjit Panghali, a resident of Vancouver, Canada, had a life that seemed to embody this ideal. But the tragic conclusion of her beautiful existence left an indelible mark on the entire nation of Canada. October 18, 2006, marked the date when the news of Manjit Panghali's disappearance emerged. However, just 5 days later, on October 23rd, her charred body was discovered on a beach shore. After this discovery, the police promptly reached the crime scene and informed Manjit's in-laws about the incident. The news quickly spread across the city of Vancouver that a partially burnt body of a woman had been found on the beach. Manjit's family was unable to comprehend why someone would commit such an act against her, as Manjit was known to be a person who always greeted everyone with a friendly smile. However, after months of investigation, the real killer of Manjit was identified, which surprised Manjit's family a lot. But in the end, to know how Manjit disappeared, who killed her, and how the killer killed Manjit, we will also need to know a little about Manjit's background. Manjit was a Canadian resident of Indian origin, residing in Vancouver, British Columbia, with her husband, Mukhtiar Panghali, and their 3-year-old daughter, Maya. Manjit's family had come to Canada in search of a better life and settled in Vancouver. They had worked hard to provide their family and children with every possible happiness. Manjit had a happy childhood. Like any young woman, she also had dreams. She had decided long ago that she wanted to become a teacher. Manjit pursued her education to become a teacher at the university, and it was during this time that she met Mukhtiar. Mukhtiar's family also hailed from India, and he had come to Canada to pursue his career in the teaching field. According to Manjit, Mukhtiar was a cheerful person just like her, which gradually made Manjit start liking him. Their meeting at the university gradually developed into feelings of love. After dating for a while, they eventually decided to get married. When both families found out that they both wanted to get married, they were quite happy. Mukhtiar's family trusted that Mukhtiar is a good and responsible guy who will always keep their daughter happy. Additionally, Mukhtiar's family also liked Manjit as a good girl. Following this, Manjit and Mukhtiar got married in 1997. In the eyes of both families, they were a perfect happy couple who were quite friendly and cheerful. However, just a few years later, when Mukhtiar's true nature was revealed, Manjit faced difficulties in her married life. Mukhtiar belonged to a conservative family, and his thinking was somewhat similar. According to him, Manjit should serve him, and when Mukhtiar returned home from work, there should be delicious food ready on his table. But now, Manjit was quite troubled by Mukhtiar's behavior. She was a woman of strong determination and hard work. She had never imagined Mukhtiar's mindset would be like this. When Manjit told her sisters and friends about the difficulties in her married life, everyone told her that these are just the initial days of her relationship, and there are always some differences or arguments between every new married couple. She just needs to be a little patient. After this, along with Manjit, her sister and Manjit's friends also forgot about this matter. Just as Manjit had planned the rest of her life, she had also planned her pregnancy in a similar way. Now, she wanted to become a mother. As a result, 6 years after getting married, her dream also came true in 2003. Manjit gave birth to a daughter whom she named Maya. Manjit was quite happy, and Mukhtiar was also very happy. Now, Mukhtiar spent most of his time with Maya. Mukhtiar loved his daughter very much. Because of this, everyone began to feel that perhaps whatever difficulties were coming in Manjit's married life, they had all ended. But this was not true. After Maya's birth, Mukhtiar started drinking even more. Whenever he drank, he would stay out of the house until late at night, and when he came home, he expected his wife to have cooked dinner and be waiting for him. But Manjit, who wanted care and support after pregnancy, was quite broken by her husband's behavior. Because of this, Manjit slipped into depression, and the dreams she had once had were now shattering in front of her eyes. Now she understood how big a mistake she had made in understanding Mukhtiar, and she was not sure what to do to set her health and future in the right direction. During this time, Manjit does not take any major action and remains patiently at Mukhtiar's house for 3 years. However, in 2006, Manjit plans to have a second child, hoping to bring happiness back into the household. Nonetheless, due to constant arguments, she begins to feel that this may no longer be possible. Shortly after, Manjit becomes pregnant again, and Mukhtiar is quite pleased upon learning this news. Unexpectedly, Mati's behavior changes significantly. He starts to love and care for Manjit as he had before, which makes Manjit very happy as she feels she has regained his lost love. However, she does not realize that this happiness will be short-lived. On October 18, 2006, Manjit had left for her prenatal yoga class, but a significant amount of time passed and she did not return home. The next day, Mukhtiar called Manjit's family and informed them that she hadn't come home since the previous evening. Upon hearing this, Manjit's family became somewhat worried. They then called Manjit's sister, Jasmine, and narrated the whole story. Jasmine also called all of Manjit's friends, but Manjit hadn't gone to any of their houses. In fact, whenever there was an argument between Mukhtiar and Manjit, Manjit often left with her daughter without informing anyone. Sometimes going to a hotel or a friend's house, everyone thought that the same thing had happened again this time, and Manjit would return home shortly. However, this time, Manjit's daughter, Maya, was at home, and this worried everyone a lot, because Manjit loved her daughter very much and never left her alone anywhere. It had been a whole day since Manjit had gone missing, so everyone began to suspect that something unfortunate might have happened to her. Therefore, her husband, Mukhtiar, filed a missing person complaint at a nearby police station on the night of October 19th. Apart from this, Mukhtiar also called all the acquaintances to inquire about Manjit, but no one had seen her. By now, the news had spread in the media that a married woman named Manjit Panghali had been missing for a few days, and Mukhtiar, Manjit's husband, appealed for her safety and return. During the police investigation, the phone calls of all household members were traced, but the police did not find any significant information. Here too, the date was now October 23, 2006, and Manjit had been missing for 5 days. Manjit's husband and family members became worried when the police informed them that a charred body had been found on the shore of a place called South Delta, and they were asked to come and identify it. When Manjit's family members went there to see, they found that the body was indeed Manjit's. Manjit's body was sent for a post-mortem examination, and the report revealed that she was pregnant with a female fetus at the time of her death. This news deeply distressed Manjit's family, who were left to wonder what wrongdoing their daughter had committed that led to her being brutally murdered by being set on fire. From a logical perspective, Manjit's killer not only took her life, but also the life of the child she was carrying in her womb. The post-mortem report also reveals that Manjit's death was not caused by burning, but rather the killer first strangled Manjit, and then, when she had stopped breathing, attempted to burn her body. During the investigation, the police also found Manjit's car parked at a distance from her dead body. Forensic examination of the car revealed no signs of forced entry or any marks of struggle inside the car. Subsequently, the police first checked Manjit's background, but didn't find any suspects who had enmity with Manjit. Due to this reason, the police suspected that perhaps the killer was someone who knows Manjit well. Hence, the police's direct suspicion falls on Manjit's family members. The police first thought of questioning Manjit's husband Mukhtiar. During the interrogation, Mukhtiar stated that Manjit has been in regular contact with her college friend Tony for the past year, and they sometimes went to dinner together. After Mukhtiar's statement, the police now doubted Tony, and then they searched for and interrogated Tony as well. However, upon talking to Tony, the police found out that Tony didn't have any relationship with Manjit, as Mukhtiar had claimed. Tony and Manjit were just good friends, and this fact was confirmed when Tony answered all questions correctly in the lie detector test. Now the police had to determine why Mukhtiar had lied to them. Therefore, the interrogation with Mukhtiar resumed. During this interrogation, the police discovered that there was an individual from the families of Manjit and Mukhtiar who was quite close to both of them. In fact, that person's name was Sukender, and he was Mukhtiar's younger brother. Sukender Panghali used to live in the basement of Manjit and Mukhtiar's house. However, at Manjit's insistence, Mukhtiar had kicked Sukender out of the house. Sukender was the one who used to persuade Mukhtiar to party until late at night and then drink with him. It was because of Sukender's influence that Mukhtiar's habit of drinking alcohol had increased even more. Manjit noticed how Sukender's presence was negatively impacting her life, so she gave her husband Mukhtiar an ultimatum: either Sukender stays, or she stays in this house. Mukhtiar faced a difficult choice between supporting his brother or his wife. He decided to ask Sukender to leave and remain with Manjit. After investigating the incident, the police initially suspected Sukender, but could not find any evidence against him. Sukender was able to prove that he was with his friends on the night Manjit disappeared. As a result, the police cleared Sukender of any wrongdoing. However, they later detained Mukhtiar again for further questioning. By now, the police had determined that the relationship between Manjit and Mukhtiar had begun to deteriorate just a few months after their marriage. Whenever Manjit discovered Mukhtiar's daily habit of drinking alcohol, she scolded him. On the other hand, Manjit had hurt Mukhtiar's brother Sukender by throwing him out of the house, which had wounded Mukhtiar's ego and masculinity, causing him to harbor even more resentment towards Manjit. However, despite this, there was no solid evidence to make Mukhtiar the prime suspect in Manjit's murder case. Moreover, Manjit's family and friends also had substantial trust in him. But now the police have decided to re-examine all the evidence. First, the police noticed that the driver's seat of the car was pushed back, which indicated that Manjit had not driven the car there by herself. Rather, there was someone else with her in the car at the time. Secondly, Mukhtiar had mentioned the location of Manjit's prenatal classes in his statement, and the car was parked near that area. However, during the investigation, it was found that there were no prenatal yoga classes in that area, and the actual location where Manjit used to attend her prenatal classes was approximately 15 miles away from the location provided by Mukhtiar. Consequently, Mukhtiar's lie was caught. In simple words, Mukhtiar told the police that Manjit's prenatal yoga class location was where her dead body was found. But in reality, Manjit's prenatal classes were far away from that place. After that, the police tracked Mukhti's phone's location and call records. Here, the police discovered that Mukhtiar had Manjit's cell phone, in which he had inserted his own SIM and was using it. This revealed to the police that on the evening of October 18th, Manjit had visited Mukhti's house. Therefore, Mukhtiar had Manjit's cell phone. By now, all the statements given by Mukhtiar were proving to be false. Then, the police got solid evidence in their hands. They obtained CCTV footage from a gas station near Manjit's house, in which Mukhtiar was seen buying an old newspaper and a lighter from that gas station. Although Mukhtiar used to drink alcohol, he did not smoke cigarettes, so why would he buy a lighter and an old newspaper? Here, Mukhtiar became a prime suspect in the eyes of the police, so the police took immediate action. Nearly 6 months later, on March 12, 2006, Mukhtiar was arrested in his wife Manjit's murder case. The police interrogated Mukhtiar rigorously. At first, he completely denied the claim of murdering Manjit, portraying himself as innocent. But then, after some time, his courage broke, and he confessed to his crime. Now the culprit was caught. When Mukhtiar explained why he had mercilessly killed his pregnant wife on October 18th, the police was shaken to the core. Mukhtiar explained that after Manjit's yoga class, he took her home, where an argument broke out between them. The argument escalated to the point that, in a fit of rage, Mukhtiar strangled Manjit, killing her. He then took her body to a secluded seaside location in South Delta and burned it in an attempt to destroy any evidence that could be used by the police. In addition, Mukhtiar provided the reason behind wanting to kill Manjit. Essentially, Mukhtiar had developed hatred towards Manjit. Mukhtiar's mind was filled with intense dislike and negativity towards Manjit, which became the cause of Manjit's death. Hearing this, both Manjit's and Mukhtiar's families and friends were greatly surprised. Subsequently, in November 2010, Mukhtiar was found guilty in the Manjit murder case, and he was also charged with second-degree murder. It was a shocking murder that sent shockwaves across the province. Former school teacher Mukhtiar Pangali strangled his pregnant wife and then burned her body. Immediately after Mukhti's arrest, both Manjit's and Mukhti's families fought a case in court for the full custody of Mukhti's 3-year-old daughter Maya. However, in the end, Maya's full custody was awarded to Manjit's sister, Jasmine Bambra. Then, in February 2011, Mukhtiar was sentenced to life imprisonment. Crown Prosecutor Dennis Murray narrated the incident in the following manner. Immediately after the verdict of the Manjit murder case, Mukhtiar killed Manjit immediately after she returned from prenatal yoga classes. Then he took her body to a secluded coastal area in South Delta in Manjit's own car and set it on fire. He delayed filing a missing complaint as much as possible. In December 2010, the Canadian police publicly disclosed Manjit's diary and letters. After this, several media houses extensively scrutinized these letters, revealing that Manjit was clinically depressed. However, she was making a lot of effort to save her married life. During discussions with media houses, a member of Manjit's family revealed that she had been struggling with depression since her first pregnancy. Mukhtiar not only killed Manjit, but also took 2 lives. She was so happy to be pregnant. It was something that she had wanted for a long time. So with that, the Manjit Pangali murder case comes to an end. Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case, the case of Brett Ryan. Brett grew up in a prosperous and large Canadian family. His parents, Bill and Susan, had 4 sons. Brett's parents tried to teach him through their own actions. His father held a prestigious job at the Toronto Star daily newspaper and had various hobbies like sports, yoga, and psychology. Likewise, Susan was very hardworking. Their entire household rested on her shoulders. She not only devoted time to her husband and children, but also managed the huge house in Toronto's prestigious area, without any help from gardeners or craftsmen. Just like his older brothers, Brett went to university after high school. He always aimed to be better than his siblings, so he advertised painting services in a local newspaper for Toronto residents' houses and fences. Initially, things went well. He made his first earnings, and Susan was proud of him, often using him as an example for others. However, making money as a part-time job is one thing. Dropping out of university to spend all your time inhaling paint fumes without proper education is another matter altogether. After some time in university, Brett decided to drop out. For the first couple of years after this decision, Brett still felt confident compared to his older brothers. After a while, when Christopher and Leland graduated and found jobs in their fields, Brett's authority began to fade. Christopher started working for the City of Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland, the family artist and designer. Following their studies, they moved out of their parents' home. Brett, to avoid spending part of his earnings on rent, stayed with his father, mother, and younger brother, who attended a school for gifted children. With each passing year, Brett grew more desperate due to his mounting debts and his inability to pay them off. He developed depression. By 2007, when Brett was already 26 years old, his debt had ballooned past $60,000. Although Brett was considered an intelligent individual, he did know how to effectively use his mind. He always put on a cheerful face and helped everyone around him. He was a participant in volunteer initiatives. Consequently, no one could fathom the depth of despair within him. Eventually, a fateful moment arrived when nothing could be done. On October 28, 2007, Brett had no work orders for house painting or any other tasks around the house. Orders were always scarce in the fall, since everyone typically painted their houses in spring or summer. With winter approaching and no prospects for earnings, there was no time to wait. Brett donned all the old clothes he had in his closet: a hat, a long sweater from his older brother, and a scarf knitted by his mother. This particular scarf was comically long. Brett hadn't worn it before, but now found it useful. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank located on the outskirts of his neighborhood. Clutching some thick folder, Brett waited for his turn at the bank. When an employee finally summoned him, he approached her and quietly informed her that he had a gun with him. He instructed her to take all the money out of the bank's cash register and give it to him. The girl, shaken with trembling hands, handed him all the cash from the register. Brett then quietly exited the building to avoid drawing the attention of the guards. Once outside, he ran. Upon counting the stolen money, he realized it amounted to just over $1,000. This sum was far from sufficient to clear his debts. He calculated that robbing about 60 banks would be necessary to meet his financial obligations. Despite how improbable that seemed, Brett saw no alternative. In the initial days following the robbery, Brett was consumed with fear that the police might track him down. To avoid detection, he refrained from going home and informed his mother that he had a job in a neighboring town. Instead, he spent nights in his car, cautiously approaching his house periodically to check if any police cars were hidden nearby. Each visit confirmed silence and no signs of pursuit. This reassured Brett that his plan was working. The success of the first robbery led to more, a second, a third, and a fourth. Each time, Brett took precautions to change his appearance by wearing different clothes, purchased second-hand or even retrieved from trash, and burning them afterward. He also invested in a fake beard from a costume store, since bank employees always mentioned his beard in their testimonies. News outlets in Toronto began covering stories about the bearded robber, but despite this notoriety, he never managed to gain substantial amounts through these crimes, the most being just $3,000 per robbery. Brett's hit a snag when police identified his vehicle on surveillance cameras and traced it back to his residence. Lacking solid evidence for an arrest, law enforcement decided simply to monitor him closely. For about 15 days following this new development, Brett refrained from further robberies, even though no more than 3 or 4 days typically passed between crimes before this. His unusual hiatus led some officers to believe they were tailing an innocent person and wasting resources on a dead end, but then fortune turned in favor of law enforcement. Brett left the house, got into a car, and later exited not far from the bank. Wearing a different and unusual outfit, he entered the branch and remained there for some time. Upon leaving, he was immediately apprehended by the police, who announced that the much-discussed bearded robber had finally been caught. Brett had been under investigation for 7 months and was charged with armed robbery. Interestingly, despite having a gun permit, the bearded robber always entered the bank unarmed. He did not even carry a kitchen knife. In total, Brett faced 19 charges and was subsequently imprisoned. Brett and his family filed multiple appeals, which led to only 8 of the 19 counts being upheld. However, Brett didn't stop there. At the first opportunity to apply for parole, he submitted a petition. In it, he requested consideration of his severe depression caused by 2 failed relationships and substantial debt. Additionally, he emphasized that he committed these crimes without intending to harm anyone and without carrying any weapons. His remarks were taken. However, to secure early release from prison, he had to undergo sessions with a psychologist. These sessions had a positive impact on Brett's behavior and mindset while incarcerated. During this period, he did not communicate with his family, but eventually took steps to mend those relationships. The positive changes in Brett were recognized by the commissioners overseeing his case. Consequently, on November 24, 2010, Brett was released from prison. Nonetheless, this hard-won freedom turned out to be more challenging than anticipated. Before becoming known as Brett the Bank Robber, he was simply a painter, burdened with personal struggles. Post-incarceration life proved difficult. Few companies were willing to hire an ex-convict with such a tainted background. Even when hired for house painting services, clients would cancel upon recognizing him as the infamous bearded robber. The social repercussions extended to his family as well. Neighbors who once praised Susan's garden began spreading unpleasant rumors about them. The Ryan family decided to sell their house hastily and move to Scarborough, where Susan started cultivating her new garden afresh. Despite these challenges, Brett managed to find employment at a trading company. However, his salary was modest. His parents also assisted financially in helping him rebuild his life and continue his university education. Brett continued to see a psychologist. Each session, the specialist advised him not to sever ties with his family. The psychologist's advice proved effective. However, Brett's financial situation remained precarious. Then, in September 2011, a significant positive event occurred in his life. He met Kristen Baxter. Kristen was an exceptional girl. She owned an apartment with windows that offered stunning view of the sea, which provided the young couple with a picturesque landscape to enjoy. She was also athletic, maintaining excellent physical condition. Crucially, she was unconcerned about Brett's past. As a couple, they traveled periodically and had even visited Australia. Brett's parents were delighted to observe his relationship with Kristen flourish. They were confident that Kristen would encourage him to advance in life and secure his place in society. Life seemed to improve for Brett until his father passed away. This loss profoundly affected him and triggered a return of depressive symptoms. Consequently, he had to increase his visits to the psychologist and spend time supporting his mother, both emotionally and financially, despite his limited resources. Realizing that their relationship needed to advance beyond casual dating, given their maturity, Brett decided to make a commitment to Kristen. He had saved some money and discussed his intentions with his mother. He expressed his desire to propose to Kristen, the goal being a memorable proposal she couldn't refuse. Understanding her son's intention, Susan provided additional funds for him to purchase an engagement ring. Notably, the couple had previously discussed their future together, and it was clear that Kristen did not require an extravagant gift or similar symbols of commitment. Brett's proposal to Kristen meant the world to her, signaling his serious intentions. Despite this, he decided to go the extra mile and purchased a gold ring adorned with a sizable diamond for his beloved. Naturally, Kristen accepted his proposal. From there, they began planning their wedding. Brett, with all of Kristen's decisions, nodding in approval. However, the rising costs and financial implications unsettled him. He started worrying about his career prospects and financial stability. Determined to secure a stable job, Brett found an engineering position at a prominent tech company online. He meticulously prepared his resume and applied for the job. To his delight, he was invited for an interview and subsequently received a job offer. Elated by the news, Brett shared it with Kristen and his mother. Eager to make a good impression at his new job, he asked his mother for money to purchase an expensive suit. As always, she didn't refuse him. Yet, just when everything seemed perfect, Brett received a disappointing call from the company. Their security team had uncovered details of his criminal past, leading them to rescind their offer. This news hit Brett hard. It was like a bolt from the blue. His spirits dropped immediately. Frustration set in as he considered the futility of ongoing interviews, each ending in rejection due to his past. Faced with repeated setbacks, Brett decided that rather than continuing with futile efforts and investing time in studies that seemed pointless due to his tarnished record, he would use the funds allocated for university studies on their wedding instead. Brett thus found himself back where he had recently escaped from, but kept certain truths hidden from loved ones, including dropping out of university and being rejected from the engineering role. He maintained appearances by dressing in professional attire each morning before heading to paint houses, changing clothes en route. To further sustain this facade among friends and family, Brett frequently updated social media profiles with pictures seemingly originating from an office environment or business events, images sourced off the internet, and would even pretend he's resolving urgent work-related matters during family gatherings by faking phone calls regarding work issues. In September 2016, after a 5-year relationship with Kristen, Brett sought to plan a wedding. He demonstrated a remarkable ability to conceal his true situation, successfully creating the illusion of a stable life. Despite being a common painter, he projected an image of success and prosperity. Brett agreed to rent an expensive restaurant, requiring $100 per guest. The entire Ryan family was thrilled seeing Brett's apparent transformation: a prestigious job, a fancy apartment, and an attractive bride. However, the truth of Brett's deceit was far more complex. With the wedding just a month away, Brett needed funds for the event. He repeatedly borrowed money from his mother until she could no longer assist him financially. Desperate, he even demanded that she seek higher-paying employment. Planning his party for August, he invited all his friends and brothers. As the pressure mounted, Brett confided in his counselor about his deceptions. He had been lying to his family for a year about working as an engineer at a technology company. The psychologist expressed deep disappointment and advised Brett to come clean to his mother. Though reluctant, Brett eventually told his mother the truth. Her devastation was profound. She had spent years boasting about her wonderful son. She insisted that Brett also confess everything to Kristen, or she would do it herself. His brothers were already aware of the lies and supported their mother's stance. Unable to face telling Kristen the truth himself, a shocking task after barely managing to reveal it to his mother, Brett found himself in an untenable position as the wedding approached. He knew that informing Kristen would prevent the ceremony and considered if honesty might have been better. Facing pressure from all sides, Brett still couldn't admit the truth to Kristen and feared his mother might do so before long. Each time Kristen's phone rang, he tensed up until realizing it was not her discovering the secret, but rather another friend discussing wedding plans. Desperate for resolution and unable to handle the mounting stress any longer, he needed a final solution. He was forbidden to use firearms, so the boy decided that the best way to carry out his plan was to use a crossbow. Besides, it's quite a silent murder weapon. One of his late father's hobbies was bow shooting in the at targets. He taught Brett how to. Yes, was good at target shooting, though it was unlikely his late father thought his son would that skill in such manner. Brett bought crossbow and arrows at a sporting goods store and hid it behind the construction debris lying in Susan's garage. At home, he arranged what he thought was an ingenious alibi invention. He tied a spoon to a fan and set the fan on a timer. When the timer went off, the fan turned on, and the spoon moved across the computer keyboard, sending pre-prepared comments to YouTube. From an outsider's perspective, it must have seemed like Brett had spent all day at home watching videos and commenting on them. On the morning of August 25th, Brett, dressed in strange clothes that hid his face, left the house through the back door to avoid security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house. His aim was to eliminate anyone who might disrupt his and Kristen's well-being once and for all. Susan was very surprised at her son's unexpected arrival. She had not been feeling well that day. But Brett, despite his mother's condition, began once again to persuade her, and even demand, that she not tell his future wife anything. The mother categorically refused him. Then Brett began to get angry. Susan sensed something wrong seeing her son's mad eyes, and warned him that she had already called Christopher, and he was on his way. Brett went berserk. He ran to the garage to get a crossbow, but found that his anger and adrenaline overflowed him with such force that he couldn't even make a shot. Instead, he bludgeoned his mother with the butt of the gun, and finally ensured she was dead by tightening a rope around her neck. After throwing plastic bags over the body, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows and hid in the bushes, waiting for his brother to arrive. After a while, Christopher arrived and started calling for their mother or brother, but received no response. Only an arrow shot from behind, which pierced his neck, causing him to die within minutes. The next victim was Alexander, their youngest brother. As it turns out, Susan had managed to call him too before everything happened. He was also shot in the neck, but either the arrow did not penetrate deeply or it missed vital arteries. Thus, Alexander did not die immediately, but began to scream and call for help. During this time, Leland was in the house, sleeping in his room on the 2nd. He had no idea of the carnage occurring in the garage and garden, much less that his own brother was committing the crime. Leland's sleep was disturbed by a scream. Coming downstairs, he saw Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett. As soon as Leland gained the upper hand and managed to push Brett aside, he ran to the neighbors and called the police. Brett stayed in the house. He had nowhere to run. He realized this was the moment he had completely ruined his life. With nothing else to do, he took out his phone and wrote Kristen a letter asking her to forgive him. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they saw a bloody Brett sitting next to his equally bloody but still alive brother Alexander, who would later die in the hospital. Brett himself asked the policeman to handcuff him and take him to the station, where he confessed everything. Brett also informed them that his mother's body was hidden under packages in the garage, but it was impossible to help her. At both the police station and later at trial, Brett admitted that he did not intend to kill Susan. His plan was merely to scare her. However, he did plan to kill Christopher and Alexander that day since they were witnesses, and if they hadn't arrived, they would still be alive. Almost 10 years ago, he tried justifying everything with his depressive state, but it did not soften his sentence. Despite acknowledging that Brett confessed everything on his own accord and did not hinder the investigation in any way, the judge sentenced him to 3 life terms, 1 for each murder, with parole eligibility in 2041. As for Leland, he is not speaking to reporters, but is known throughout Toronto as the sole survivor of that dreadful incident. On May 2, 2009, in Wausau, Wisconsin, USA, a terrible crime took place. An 18-year-old girl named Brianna Marie Schneller was the victim. For the small town, such an event was shocking, particularly since the girl's death was the result of actions executed with unimaginable cruelty. However, more shocking than the crime itself was the motive behind it. Brianna had a vibrant personality, loved Mexican cuisine, music, and dancing, and she was fond of roller coasters. She was very diligent and performed well academically. She was the top student at Everest High School in Washington, said Craig and Lori Schneller, her parents. She had a trip planned to Tennessee that summer. The young lady was the only one in the state of Wisconsin who had made it through the qualifying rounds of a competition held by a renowned national nonprofit organization for students in professional and technical fields, where she was to present her project. Brianna aspired to pursue higher education in restaurant management and dreamed of someday starting her own business in the food service industry. Therefore, she worked part-time at the El Mezcal restaurant in Rib Mountain to earn money and gain the necessary experience and skills. Friends, colleagues, and even patrons described her as a kind and responsive person. She was just a month away from significant milestones in her life. She was about to graduate from school and marry her beloved 22-year-old Sebastian Ramirez. Initially, her parents objected to their relationship and the age difference. In their view, their daughter had matured too quickly. However, after getting to know the young man better, they trusted him. It was evident that he genuinely loved Brianna and had serious intentions regarding their future together. The couple moved in together, renting an apartment on 12th Avenue in Wausau along with Sebastian's 19-year-old brother, Hugo. Outwardly, it seemed that the trio got along well and lived peacefully. Many envied their friendship. The brothers supported Brianna's interests, as they also worked at a restaurant called El Tequila Salsa in the same area. It is possible that one workday was when Sebastian and Brianna met each other. In any case, no one expected that a horrific tragedy could disrupt the plans and dreams of the two lovers. The morning of May 2, 2009 began as usual. Sebastian was the first to rise in the house. He didn't want to wake the girl sweetly sleeping beside him. It was a day off, and she didn't need to rush to school. While the young man was in the shower, Brianna woke up. They exchanged sweet greetings and discussed their plans for the day. Meanwhile, Sebastian tried to wake up Hugo, who had come home in the early morning and had clearly overdone it at a party the night before. After that, Sebastian left for work, which was only a 5-10-minute walk away. His younger brother followed soon after. The girl stayed home alone. She exchanged messages with her mother and then got on with her tasks. That day, Hugo felt restless. He had a headache from too much drinking and regretted overindulging. Struggling to focus, he decided to swap lunch breaks with a colleague, and at 1:20 p.m., he headed home to catch some sleep. When he entered the apartment, nothing seemed unusual at first. However, as he walked further, he noticed a disorder in his brother's and his girlfriend's room. For some reason, Brianna was lying on the floor. Hugo rushed to her and asked what happened, but she did not respond. He didn't immediately notice the blood. The young man moved the towel that had been covering her face and screamed. She was unrecognizably disfigured. He grabbed the phone to call the emergency services, but his hands were shaking and his mind was foggy. Nevertheless, he knew he had to act, and he ran to his neighbor's apartment, a floor below. Through tears, young Ramirez tried to explain what had happened and asked the woman to call for help. At 1:30 p.m., the emergency services received a call. Despite it being a Saturday, the day was far from peaceful. Unfortunately, incidents often occur on days when people are supposed to relax. The woman on the other end of the line reported that she was calling on behalf of a neighbor. He had asked her to summon emergency medical services for his brother's girlfriend. The unfortunate woman lay on the floor with cuts on her body and a disfigured face, showing no signs of life. Police and paramedics were dispatched to the address immediately. The parking lot of the apartment building was crowded, but one individual stood out from the crowd and approached them. It was Hugo Ramirez. He led the officers to the apartment. The young man could barely speak, so he simply pointed out the shocking scene. At the center of it all lay Brianna, her body bearing deep wounds. Stab wounds were evident on her chest, neck, and wrist. The officers asked the young man to leave the room while forensic specialists began their examination. One speculated that the victim had been lying there for some time, as the blood scattered everywhere had already started to dry. It was clear she had fought back, as evidenced by the defensive cuts on her arms. However, the assailant had overpowered her. The crime scene was rife with evidence. The first thing the forensic team noticed was a bloody iron lying on the floor, broken with some pieces scattered nearby. It appeared that the criminal had used it to strike her face. 2 knives lay in the bathroom sink, one missing its sharp tip. Blood was found on the soap, leading investigators to speculate that the criminal had used it to wash their hands. But the bloodied shoe print left on the carpet drew more attention. Overall, the examination of the dwelling revealed several curious details. There appeared to be no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victim knew the wrongdoer or that he had some way of gaining entry to the apartment. Another notable detail was the scattered bills ranging from $1 to $20, amounting to a substantial sum. Hugo explained that these were tips they had accumulated at work, so much so that they were just placed anywhere. At first glance, nothing seemed to be missing from the apartment. Everything pointed to the fact that Brianna was the target of the attack, not robbery. This was confirmed by the broken knife tip found in her body. What kind of force was necessary to break a knife? Who could harbor such feelings towards a young woman? And most importantly, what could have been the cause of such unprecedented cruelty and aggression? Eager to shed light on the matter, law enforcement officers were keen to speak with the girl's relatives and close friends, especially as they needed to convey the dreadful news. In the police department's office, Craig and Lori Schneller awaited news. They had heard that something terrible had occurred at the home where their daughter lived, but unfortunately, they had been unable to contact her. With heavy hearts, they went to the police station seeking answers. The officers had to confirm the parents' worst fears were indeed true. There was no greater sorrow for parents than to endure the loss of a child. The devastating news split the Schneller's life into before and after. Authorities provided photographs of Brianna for identification. The process was a mere formality, as her identity was already established, but protocol required it. Due to the horrific injuries, not all photographs taken at the scene were shown to the family. Only those that showed part of her face were displayed. Once confirmed, the Schnellers could hardly believe what had happened. After consulting with a psychologist, Craig and Lori were able to answer a series of questions. They were eager to assist the investigation and catch the person responsible, so they provided as much information about their daughter's life as possible. The parents insisted that she had no known enemies or ill-wishers, at least to their knowledge. It was also revealed that Brianna's mother was the last person she had communicated with. That morning, Lori had taken Brianna's car to the auto repair shop and had messaged her daughter around 10 a.m. to inform her. Brianna had responded. This means that the tragic incident occurred after she spoke with her mother and before Hugo's arrival, establishing a timeline for the events. The police launched a comprehensive investigation. The first to be invited for an interview by the detectives were the Rodriguez brothers, Sebastian and Hugo, who were questioned separately. The fiancé of the victim, Sebastian, reported that he woke up at 9:15 in the morning, had a brief conversation with Brianna while getting ready for work, and then woke his brother. By 10:15, he was already at the restaurant. He learned about the incident after receiving a phone call. Hugo's account matched, stating he left the house about 15 minutes after Sebastian. He returned home at 1:20 p.m. because he was feeling unwell and wanted to rest. However, his illness and fatigue vanished when he discovered Brianna lifeless. After that, everything seemed like a blur. He explained that he was so stunned that he couldn't think straight on how to react properly. His mind shut down and his hands trembled, leaving him to run to a neighbor and ask for help. The Ramirez brothers' statements were credible and their distress appeared genuine. However, the police had often encountered convincing performances before, so they needed solid proof of their innocence. It was entirely possible that one of them was the perpetrator and the other was covering for him. Therefore, detectives inquired about their relationships with each other. Sebastian declared his love for Brianna and his anticipation for their upcoming wedding. Hugo was asked if he had any grievances against his brother's girlfriend, or if they had quarreled, to which he responded negatively. He also clarified that despite her attractiveness and charm, he had no intentions toward her because he valued their good relationship and would never interfere with Sebastian's happiness. Brianna was like a sister to him. The interrogations lasted for hours, yet neither brother aroused any suspicion. After taking DNA samples from the young men, they were allowed to return home. To confirm or refute the Ramirez brothers' alibis, detectives interviewed employees of El Tequila Salsa restaurant and reviewed the establishment's surveillance footage. Sebastian and Hugo's accounts were corroborated. The theory of a domestic-related crime was dismissed. Then who was the murderer of this innocent young woman? Could there be a predator in the city? Perhaps he had been watching Brianna earlier and had learned much about her. Maybe on a day when she was alone, he executed his criminal intent. The investigation continued. By this point, the autopsy results had come in, confirming the initial suspicions of the police. The sequence of the crime was reconstructed as follows. Brianna first sustained a blunt force injury to the head, likely with an iron. Then the perpetrator cut her throat, followed by multiple stab wounds to her body. The ferocity and relentlessness of the attack were evidenced by the number of wounds, which were so numerous that even experts couldn't tally them. At least 2 of these injuries were immediately fatal. The young woman fought fiercely for her life, as indicated by the foreign DNA found under her nails. Later developments revealed that earlier statements claiming nothing was missing from the home were incorrect. The victim's phone had disappeared. Sebastian discovered the loss and promptly informed the detectives. This piece of information became a critical lead, as once the police received this new clue, they began searching for the mobile device. Brianna's cell phone provider reported that her phone was still active and provided its location. It turned out that the phone had been nearby all along, specifically within the premises of the restaurant where Sebastian and Hugo worked. The investigation grew more complex with the brothers' undeniable alibi, and one of them reporting the missing phone against the backdrop of suspicious coincidences. Detectives urgently traveled to the specified location, but upon arrival, they found that the coordinates led to the parking lot of a shopping center housing the restaurant. It appeared the sought-after item was in one of the trash bins. After a brief search, a plastic takeout bag with the logo of El Tequila Salsa was found inside a container. Within the bag were the girl's phone, 2 mismatched gloves, and a pair of women's underwear. One of the gloves was stained with blood. This unexpected discovery shifted the narrative, as theories about a predator and a crime driven by intimate motives began to gain traction. The bag and its contents were sent to the laboratory for further examination, potentially still holding fingerprints or DNA from the perpetrator. When shown a photo of the contents, Sebastian recognized his girlfriend's underwear. The investigation proceeded with numerous interrogations of the restaurant staff. On May 5th, everyone was asked to provide DNA samples and undergo examinations for any scratches or injuries. Additionally, both the external and internal surveillance footage of the building and neighboring establishments was thoroughly reviewed. The police had a considerable task ahead of them to determine who had disposed of the bag. Initially, a kitchen worker attracted attention because he was notably late for work, arriving when Brianna was already lifeless. However, the young man had an alibi. He had been stopped for speeding on his way to the restaurant. Nonetheless, reviewing the surveillance footage proved invaluable to the investigation. Another individual, the 24-year-old kitchen manager Raul Ponce Rocha, became a person of interest. On the day of the crime, He left the building at 10:18 a.m. wearing a brown hoodie and returned at 10:53 a.m. without it. During questioning, he was asked about his whereabouts and intentions. Raul explained that he had gone to pick up his friend Luciano, a dishwasher at the restaurant. Interestingly, Luciano lived in the same building as Brianna, Sebastian, and Hugo. When asked how long his errand took, he said about 20 minutes, but there was a problem with the timeline. What happened in the remaining 15 minutes? Raul refused to explain. Meanwhile, Luciano confirmed Raul's story, saying they did not stop anywhere on their way to work. However, the 15-minute discrepancy continued to trouble the detectives, and Raul's behavior raised questions. He had cuts on his hands, which he attributed to working with knives. Raul was clearly suspicious, but there wasn't enough evidence for his detention. By May 9th, it was established that on May 2nd, at 1:16 p.m., a single employee exited the back door of El Tequila Salsa, and at the same time, only one person approached the trash bins. Identifying the suspect took little time. When his name was announced, the investigative team was not surprised. It was not Sebastian or Hugo Ramirez, as initially thought, but the suspect, Raul Ponce-Rocha. When a search warrant was obtained for his home, curious details about the manager's life emerged. Under the mattress of his bed were found 4 pairs of women's underwear, several adult videos along with a brown hoodie and a glove resembling the one found in the trash bin. On the same day, Raul's DNA samples were sent for comparison with those found on the plastic bag. A strand of female hair found on his clothing was also analyzed. Everything pointed to the victim, Brianna. It was just a matter of matching the test results. Raul was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. When it became known that the alleged perpetrator had been found, Sebastian couldn't believe his ears. He never thought his colleague capable of such cruelty. The main question that troubled him was, why did he do it? They hardly knew Brianna and had only seen her in passing. Raul had always seemed like a kind and cheerful guy, someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. But the answer was found. The trial of Raul Ponce-Rocha took place in 2011. Despite the lengthy investigation, Ponce-Rocha never admitted guilt and consistently denied any involvement in the crime. However, the prosecution presented compelling evidence. The defendant's DNA was found on all key pieces of evidence: the iron, the knives, the plastic bag and its contents, and under Brianna's fingernails. Additionally, a shoe print found on the carpet at the crime scene matched the size and pattern of the suspect's shoes. The investigation painted a clear picture of the events. On May 2, 2009, Raul arrived at work at 9 a.m. En route to the restaurant, he passed the victim's house, a place that had long piqued his interest. Not seeing her car, he assumed she was out and saw it as an opportune moment to enter her apartment and take what he desired. The accused had a peculiar habit of collecting women's underwear, the evidence of which was found under his mattress. After the Rodriguez brothers arrived at work, Raul left the restaurant under the guise of picking up Luciano. Instead of signaling his friend immediately upon arrival, he entered the victim's apartment. He easily unlocked the door and entered. It appears he went into Brianna's room and began rummaging through her belongings. He was likely caught off guard at that moment. Otherwise, he could have excused his unexpected presence by claiming he was looking for one of the brothers and that the door had been open. Realizing the absurdity of the situation and fearing recognition, he struck her with the first object he could find, an iron. He then slashed her throat with a knife, followed by inflicting multiple injuries. The investigation concluded that the process of taking her life seemed to gratify him, as evidenced by the excessive number of wounds inflicted on the poor victim. It also noted that Raul used multiple knives during the attack. Afterwards, the culprit tried to cover his tracks by washing his hands and removing his jacket, as he still had to meet Luciano and drive him to the restaurant. He then resumed work, as if nothing had happened, which was captured on the kitchen's video recordings. When many staff took their lunch breaks, he seized the moment to dispose of the bag containing the evidence in a trash bin. Shortly before the trial, Raul stated that he indeed met with Brianna, but did not end her life. However, he suspected who might have done it and named a former restaurant employee. According to the defendant, he saw this acquaintance at Brianna's house on the day her life was tragically ended, thus confirming that he indeed entered the Ramirez apartment. However, when he left, Sergio stayed with Brianna, apparently having an argument. The defendant's statement raised additional questions and investigations. The information he provided was subject to verification. Moreover, the individual he mentioned was abroad. Nonetheless, authorities managed to contact Sergio. He even appeared at the trial to testify his non-involvement and refute Raul's slander. The young man easily proved that he was not in the country on the day of the crime. Weeks before, he had left to care for his gravely ill father in Mexico. Apparently, the defendant hoped that contact with Sergio would not be established, thereby sowing a seed of doubt among the jurors. However, his plan failed. The defendant merely emphasized that he had no qualms about falsely accusing an innocent person of a heinous crime. It was clear that he felt no remorse for his actions. During the trial, Brianna's relatives, as well as Sebastian and Hugo, were present. The young men struggled to contain their emotions, prompting officers to repeatedly call for calm. Ultimately, Raul Ponce-Rocha was found guilty of the crime against Brianna Schneller, as well as burglary. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He is serving his sentence at a correctional institution in Walpun, Wisconsin. Following the verdict, the victim's father stated that his daughter's case had become personal for many involved, as they all have families and children. He shared that he has not parted with a Father's Day card Brianna gave him, cherishing every memory of her. Craig Schneller confessed that Brianna's death broke his heart, and he lost faith. No information about Sebastian Ramirez is available. It is only to be hoped that he has closed this tragic chapter of his life with a sense of completeness and has been able to move forward. One day, his brother Hugo appeared on a television show discussing the ordeal they endured. Raul's actions were fatal for Brianna. He not only ended the life of a beautiful young woman, but also devastated the hearts of her family. Things could have been different if the young man had not chosen to cover his tracks. He might have gotten away with clumsy explanations and apologies to the girl. At most, it would have ended with a confrontation between him and the Rodriguez brothers. It is unlikely the victim would have reported him to the police, and even then, the incident could have been resolved with minimal harm.